from Corsica to the fourth Rome. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 1 Attack. On an ordinary evening in the Mediterranean, a merchant ship converted from a heavy frigate, the White Rose, was sailing steadily across the calm sea. In order to expand the capacity, the White Rose removed one of the two original gun decks and converted it into a passenger cabin and cargo hold. Of course, only those with extremely poor economic conditions would choose to board such a merchant ship. After all, not everyone can tolerate the darkness and dampness of the lower deck and the mosquitoes and rats that breed everywhere. My head hurts so much. In a room in the lower cabin, a young man with delicate features rubbed his dizzy head and struggled to sit up from the bed covered with hay. The young man took a long time to let his blurred vision clear up again and took a look at his current situation. He was in an extremely narrow room, about 4 or 5 square meters. Such a space was only enough to fit a simple bed and a small wooden table that couldn't even fit his arms. There was also a palm-sized, scratched small bronze mirror hanging on the wall. There were no windows in the room, but the faint smell of wet and salty sea could still be smelled. Of course, there was more of the unbearable smell of rotting wood. Is this on the boat? I clearly remember working overtime at the company last night. The young man muttered to himself in confusion, rubbing his still dizzy head in confusion. In his memory, his name was Yi Wen, and he was an ordinary mechanical engineer. But at this moment, a memory suddenly appeared in his mind. He seemed to be an Italian in the 18th century named Napoleon Bonaparte. Apart from this, he knew nothing about this Lawrence. Lawrence continued to look at the small room with unfocused eyes, glanced at the mirror on the wall, and then stood up and stood in front of the bronze mirror. The face in the mirror was no longer the yellow-skinned and black-haired face he was familiar with, but a blonde and white-faced young man's face. The high nose bridge and angular facial features were completely different from his impression of his appearance. Is this really me? Exclamation mark. Just when Lawrence was still confused and at a loss, the door was knocked roughly twice. Dang. Dang. Before Lawrence could respond, the other party pushed open the door. Outside the door was a muscular man with a light blue turban on his head, a sack in his right hand, and a short knife without a sheath on his waist. He seemed to be a sailor on the ship, although a long and narrow scar on his cheek made people wonder if he had ever been a pirate. "Mr. Lawrence Bonaparte, your dinner," the sailor said impatiently, then took out a piece of dry and hard black bread from the sack and threw it in. The sound of this low-quality dry bread hitting the bedboard was like a stone. Lawrence was stunned for 2 seconds before he realized that the other party was calling him. "Hey, wait a minute." Seeing the sailor about to leave, after distributing the bread, Lawrence hurriedly stopped him and asked, "Are we on a boat? Where is this ship going?" After hearing this, the sailor glanced at Lawrence jokingly and said sarcastically, "Hey, sir, don't you even look at the destination when you take the boat?" Lawrence was in no mood to joke at the moment and remained silent with an expressionless face. Seeing that there was nothing fun to do, the sailor said casually out of boredom, "It's to Corsica, a city called Ajaccio in the southwest of Corsica." Corsica? Lawrence repeated in confusion. He only remembered that it was an island in the Mediterranean and a province of France. As for Ajaccio, it is a provincial capital. There is a very famous football team there. At least it is no problem to beat the Chinese national football team. "Are we going to France?" Lawrence asked. "France?" The sailor was stunned at first, then frowned and looked at Lawrence and said, "What does Corsica have to do with the French? It is the territory of the Genoese, but the Corsicans were also seeking independence a few years ago." "Genoa? Is there a name for this country?" Lawrence closed his eyes and thought for a moment, barely remembering that it was a coastal commercial republic located in the southeast of France and the northwest of Italy. It was just that it was annexed as early as the early 19th century. Could it be that? Exclamation mark. "Excuse me, can you tell me what year it is now?" Lawrence's voice trembled a little, which was beyond his cognition. The sailor's expression was even more strange, and he kept saying, "Oh my god, there must be something wrong with your head." "Forget it, sir. It is January 1768 in the Gregorian calendar." Then Lawrence opened his mouth in shock, wanting to continue asking something. The sailor was already very impatient and said, "First, we are about to dock, sir. If you have any questions, go to the island and ask someone yourself. After that," he added, "I suggest you go to the upper deck to blow the sea breeze to clear your mind. Maybe your brain is broken here." Lawrence opened his mouth, but couldn't say anything. He could only smile bitterly and said, "Maybe. Please take me to the upper deck to get some fresh air." Then Lawrence followed the sailor through the winding corridor and climbed up the deck from a creaking wooden ladder. The wet and salty sea breeze blew in his face, mixed with the slight chill in the Mediterranean in January, which really made Lawrence sober up a lot. It was evening at this time, and the sky had not yet completely darkened, but the stars and the bright moon in the sky could be vaguely seen. The upper deck was also a mess, with hemp ropes, oilcloths, and wooden boxes everywhere, which was in line with the style of this group of sailors. Lawrence leaned against the side of the ship, letting the sea breeze hit his face. In these few tens of minutes, he still couldn't accept that he had returned to Europe more than 200 years ago. Check out the correct version on 1619 book bar. How is it? Do you feel better? The sailor seemed to have finished his work and walked to Lawrence's side, saying with a little sympathy. Lawrence smiled bitterly and nodded. Although the discomfort in his body had basically recovered, such a jump was not something he could accept in a short time. "It's indeed much more comfortable, thank you. By the way, I haven't asked your name yet." Lawrence looked at the sailor and said, "Me." The sailor leaned against the side of the ship, holding his head with both hands, looking very cool. "Just call me Grosso." Lawrence nodded, then returned to silence and continued to stare at the sea. The outline of Corsica could be seen in the field of vision, and scattered ships could also be vaguely seen entering and leaving the island. "Wait, something is wrong." Grosso beside him suddenly became serious and whispered in a low voice. Without waiting for Lawrence to respond, Grosso pointed to a ship not far away. The bow of the ship was heading straight for the White Rose, and it seemed to be approaching at full speed. Lawrence couldn't help but get a little nervous after hearing this. He squinted his eyes and looked in the direction Grosso pointed. It was a tall three-masted sailing ship, which was much taller than the White Rose, and seemed to have an extra gun deck. The most eye-catching thing was a red cross flag with a white background flying on its mainmast. "They are flying a red cross flag with a white background." Lawrence frowned and said. Grosso gritted his teeth, his voice trembling a little. "Damn it, that's a Genoese warship." "What? Do we need to be inspected?" Lawrence asked uneasily as he looked at the approaching warship. Grosso spat and said harshly, "What the hell? We have all the smuggled goods on our ship, and these Genoese bitches know it very well." In order to suppress the uprising on Corsica, Genoa imposed a trade embargo on the entire island, which meant that trade with the island could only be carried out through smuggling. The observers on the White Rose had obviously discovered the Genoese warship earlier, and the captain had responded in time, turning the ship's speed to the fourth gear and heading towards Ajaccio at full speed. Ajaccio was controlled by the Corsicans, and the Genoese warship would not dare to stay there for too long. The White Rose's full-speed escape was also discovered by the Genoese warship. Just as Lawrence was still looking at the warship with great anxiety, he heard a deafening roar, and dozens of black shadows rushed towards Lawrence's vision at a very fast speed. "Get down." During the new book period, I really need your collection and follow-up reading. If you like it, please support it a lot ORZ. I will definitely work hard to live up to your expectations ORZ. Chapter 2 Bloody Battle. Get down. Grosso was indeed an experienced sailor. When he heard the roar of the cannon, he grabbed Lawrence's collar and threw himself on the deck like a reflex. The next moment after the two of them fell, dozens of solid lead bullets hit the hull of the White Rose like a rainstorm. In an instant, the deck was filled with smoke, and wood chips and iron pieces flew everywhere. The sailors who were affected immediately let out a heart-pounding cry. "Damn it. That ship must have 70 cannons. Even 2 White Roses together are not enough for it to hit." Grosso coughed and cursed painfully, then looked at Lawrence, who was still in shock and lying on the deck, and reached out to help him up. Although the White Rose was not seriously damaged after this round of shelling, its speed was obviously affected, and the distance between the Genoa warship and the White Rose was shrinking. "Hey, it's not good." When the distance between the two ships was shortened to a certain extent, Grosso couldn't help showing an uneasy look. What happened again? Lawrence sat under the side of the ship, still breathing heavily, and asked hurriedly. For a modern man like him, let alone experiencing the bombardment in person, he has never even touched a weapon like a crossbow. Grosso stuck his head out from the cover of the side of the ship, estimated the distance, gritted his teeth and said, "It's almost within the range of the chain gun. We are going to die here." Chain gun? What is that? It's a thing that shoots a chain. If it hits the canvas, it can make a big hole. If you are unlucky and hit the mast, damn, such a thick mast can also be broken by you, Grosso said, while making an exaggerated circle with his hand. Just as Grosso finished speaking, there was another oar from the Genoa warship. Lawrence was much more skilled this time, and he quickly crouched under the cover of the ship's side with his head in his hands. As expected by Grosso, Genoa fired chain shells this time. This kind of shells, which use chains to link two projectiles together, are very effective in restricting the movement of enemy ships. Chain shells scattered above and below the White Rose, stirring up another puff of smoke, but it was much smaller than the previous round of shelling. With a huge piercing sound, several chain shells flew over the hull and accurately hit the huge mainsail. The sturdy canvas was as fragile as a piece of white paper in front of these high-speed flying chain shells, and was completely torn apart in the blink of an eye. The White Rose, which lost its sail power, was like a swimmer with cramps in the water, and could only let its speed gradually slow down. Although the White Rose continued to use the stern guns to fight back, these small caliber stern guns were just a drop in the bucket when hitting the sturdy Genoa warship, and they could not even stop the opponent's pursuit. Seeing the huge sails above their heads, turned into rags in an instant, both Grosso and Lawrence were silent. The Genoa warship, advancing at full speed, was getting closer and closer to the White Rose. Lawrence could even see the soldiers on the other warship waiting for battle with his naked eyes. "Boy, have you ever encountered a boarding battle?" Grosso suddenly spoke, but his voice was a little hoarse. Lawrence shook his head silently. He had hardly even been on a ship in his previous life. That was really hell on earth. Grosso closed his eyes, as if he was resting his mind, and recalled, there were screams everywhere, gun smoke everywhere, and the deck was full of human blood, brains, intestines, and organs that I couldn't recognize. Do you know, this wooden board under your butt, I don't know how many ounces of blood had flowed through it. Lawrence looked down at where he was sitting, and restrained himself from imagining it covered with blood. The Genoese warship was still approaching, and Lawrence could already vaguely hear the soldiers on the other ship shouting in unison and the unbearable and rude insults. For sailors who have been drifting on the sea for many years, this is a rare time for them to vent freely. The two ships were only tens of meters apart. The Genoese began to throw the hooks to the White Rose to further close the distance between the two ships until they collided. The captain of the White Rose ordered all the sailors on the lower deck to come to the upper deck. Lawrence even saw several people dressed as passengers who also came to the upper deck, looking extremely panicked. "Boy, this is for you," Grosso said, taking off the dagger from his waist and throwing it to Lawrence. Lawrence took the dagger and took a quick look. It was a classic sailor's broad-bladed dagger in the movie. The handle was a little loose, but it didn't matter. There were many gaps on the blade, which were obviously caused by frequent collisions with other weapons, but the blade was still very sharp. "We passengers have to fight too?" Lawrence held the dagger tightly, feeling a little relieved, but still asked nervously. "Hey, kid." Grosso curled his lips and said disdainfully, "Do you think that after the Genoese shoot us smugglers, they will let you take a ride on a ship? Send you safely to Corsica? You wish. You will be sent to Cuba or La Plata as slaves, or maybe Louisiana. Anyway, that piece of shitty land in America." The side of the White Rose was covered with hooks, and the distance between the two sides was less than 30 meters. The front row of the enemy was pulling the rope together to make the two ships completely close together, while the soldiers in the back row held smoothbore flintlocks to continue to suppress fire to prevent the sailors on the White Rose from cutting the rope. After throwing the dagger to Lawrence, Grosso turned around and went to his post. As for passengers like Lawrence, after each of them was given a dagger, they were left to fend for themselves. The captain of the White Rose did not expect these passengers who could not even stand steadily on the ship to be of any help in the battle. Check out the correct version on the 16:9 book forum. Bang, bang, the smoke from the smoothbore rifles filled the two ships, and sawdust flying off the hulls could be seen everywhere. This kind of shooting will continue for a while until the two sides start a real hand-to-hand fight. Lawrence was still sitting under the cover of the ship's side. The whistling bullets and continuous gunfire over his head really made him dare not act rashly. Only in the shooting stage, Lawrence had already experienced the purgatory on Earth that Grosso had just mentioned. The shouts and wails of the White Rose sailors and the Genoese soldiers were intertwined. In front of Lawrence, every few seconds a sailor would fall down with a gunshot, shouting helplessly in a pool of blood. And Lawrence knew that a more tragic battle was still to come. Finally, the smoke of gunpowder gradually dissipated, and the ships of both sides were almost stuck together. The Genoese took out several long and thick oak boards from the deck, and laid them in the middle to serve as a bridge. The sound of gunfire had almost disappeared, replaced by the loudest war cry issued by the soldiers on both ships. Lawrence swallowed his saliva, his heart beating rapidly, holding the dagger tightly in his hand, and stood up from the cover. In the hand-to-hand combat on the open deck, there was no possibility of hiding. Only fighting could have a chance to win a glimmer of life. A Genoese soldier who was charging in front saw Lawrence first, and rushed over with a knife with a grim smile. He recognized at a glance that Lawrence was not a sailor. If you can't adapt to the bumpy environment on the sea, even if there are 10,000 enemies on the ship, you will definitely not be able to beat a lame sailor. The Genoese soldier swung the dagger and chopped it down directly from the upper right corner. The blade even made a sound of wind in the air. Lawrence's attention was infinitely focused. His adrenaline level rose sharply, and he quickly raised his hand to block the chop. The two weapons suddenly collided with each other, making a crisp clang, and even sparks flashed faintly. The Genoese soldier was not surprised to see this, but continued to increase his strength, suppressing Lawrence from top to bottom. Lawrence was desperately gritting his teeth to resist the opponent's downward pressure, but the opponent suddenly released his strength, and then clenched his left fist, and rushed straight to Lawrence's abdomen. Lawrence's attention and strength were all on the blade. He was completely caught off guard by the sudden change of moves, and was thrown half a meter away by a punch without any preparation. You are worthy of holding a knife like this? The Genoese soldier looked at Lawrence on the ground with a teasing look, and said sarcastically, and at the same time stepped forward, and kicked the short knife in Lawrence's hand away. Lawrence, who was unarmed, sat on the ground in a daze. He had never felt that death was so close. Go to God and repent. The soldier pointed the tip of the knife at Lawrence's heart and said expressionlessly. The sharp tip of the knife seemed to be stained with fresh blood in the next second. Chapter 3 Brothers recognize each other. Am I going to die? This was the only thought left in Lawrence's mind. Just when Lawrence had lost all hope, he saw the deck under the feet of the Genoa soldier suddenly shaking. The soldier himself did not expect such a sudden situation, and did not react for a while. Coupled with the turbulence of the ship itself, he lost his balance and fell over. Lawrence, who was already desperate, suddenly had a gleam in his eyes, and suddenly jumped up from the ground, grabbed the dagger that had just fallen to the side, and stabbed it directly into the soldier's heart without hesitation. Although the other party's wide eyes seemed to tell of endless unwillingness, Lawrence would not give him even a second of mercy. Lawrence, who was still in shock, gasped and looked at the deck, where the other party had just stood. It turned out that it was the trapdoor leading to the lower deck, and just now someone was about to come up from the lower deck and push the trapdoor, which made the soldier unstable. Lawrence looked closely and found that it was Grosso who pushed open the door. Grosso glanced at the Genoese lying in a pool of blood and Lawrence beside him, and couldn't help but be a little surprised. I didn't expect that this tender boy could fight a battle-hardened sailor. This is the second time you saved me, Grosso, Lawrence said gratefully while panting. After a little thought, Grosso also understood what had just happened, so he nodded and said hurriedly, boy, maybe I can save your life for the third time, follow me. The Genoese soldiers were still pouring into the deck of the White Rose, but fortunately Grosso was burly and had excellent swordsmanship. He took Lawrence and fought his way out of the deck and came to the captain's cabin at the stern. The battle on the deck was not optimistic. The number of Genoese soldiers far exceeded that of the sailors on the White Rose. The sailors were retreating step by step in the waves of swords and were also retreating towards the stern. Grosso pushed open the cabin door directly, and Lawrence hesitated for a moment and followed him in. A middle-aged man with a solemn look was sitting in the cabin. The captain's cabin, which should have been magnificent, was somehow filled with messy oak barrels. Seeing Grosso coming in, the captain's expression relaxed a little. "Is it ready?" The captain's voice was very low. Grosso did not speak, but nodded heavily and seriously. "Then let's go." After the captain said these 3 words, he seemed to have drained all his strength and slumped in the chair. Grosso was about to leave the cabin, but saw that the captain was still slumped in the chair, frowned and asked, "Aren't you leaving, fool?" The captain curled his lips and laughed, and his laugh was very miserable. "How can a captain not live, and I with the ship?" After hearing this, Grosso did not dissuade him anymore, and took Lawrence out of the cabin directly. The boarding battle was about to come to an end. Although the sailors fought bloody battles, they were still driven to the stern, and there were only a dozen people left. "What is the arrangement he just mentioned? Where does he want us to go?" Lawrence looked at Grosso and asked in confusion. "Did you see those barrels in the captain's cabin?" Grosso suddenly said, "They are full of gunpowder, including the lower deck of the White Rose, which is also filled with gunpowder barrels." Ignoring Lawrence's astonishment, Grosso used all his strength and shouted loudly, "Everyone retreat." The sailors who were still fighting just now heard this roar and immediately exerted all their strength to shake off the opponents in front of them, and then rushed to the side of the ship and jumped down. "Follow me." Seeing that Lawrence did not react, Grosso grabbed his wrist and ran to the side of the ship like other sailors and jumped into the sea. There was only a series of splashes, and only the Genoese soldiers were left on the deck. The angry Genoese raised their muskets and fired at the sailors in the sea, but it was just to vent their anger. The muskets with extremely poor accuracy could not even hit an elephant at this distance. The huge impact of entering the water made Lawrence sink into the cold sea water. When Lawrence opened his eyes, what he saw from underwater were no longer 2 ships, but 2 fireballs as bright as the sun, illuminating the sea area within a radius of more than 10 miles. The huge impact force generated by the explosion spread rapidly, with the White Rose as the center, generating several waves of 2-meter high waves, which spread out. Fortunately, Lawrence was underwater and did not suffer too much impact. So Lawrence tried his best to swim to the surface of the water and found a broken wooden board to hold. The 2 sides who were still fighting fiercely just now have completely disappeared. The White Rose has turned into countless fragments, and the Genoa warship has also caught fire and suffered serious damage. It is no longer possible to pursue the sailors who jumped into the sea. Unfortunately, due to the deepening of the night, coupled with the impact of the explosion that blew the sailors to pieces, Lawrence did not find Grosso. Lawrence wanted to wait for rescue on the wooden board, but then he thought, this is not the 21st century, this is the damn year of 1768, no one will come to rescue him. Looking at Corsica, which seemed to be not far away, Lawrence knew that in such an open area, the actual distance between the 2 places was much greater than the visual distance, but staying in the sea to feed sharks was a dead end. Go for it. Lawrence gritted his teeth, held the wooden board with difficulty, and swam slowly towards Corsica with his feet. The night was already completely dark, and Lawrence didn't know how long he had been swimming. He felt that his legs were almost unconscious, and could only swing up and down mechanically. Finally, when the sky was about to break, Lawrence's legs touched the land for the first time, but before he could feel the slightest bit of happiness, the fatigue brought by the whole body's exhaustion followed. Lawrence, who could no longer bear it, had a black eye, and fell asleep on the beach. Where is this? Read the correct version in 1619 book bar. Lawrence murmured as he opened his eyes. In front of him was a white ceiling, and he was lying on a soft quilt. The room was very spacious and bright, and through the window not far away, he could see the pleasant scenery on the beach. There were 2 crystal clear glass bottles on the windowsill, with a few moving daffodils in them. Even in the 18th century, glass bottles of this quality were not affordable for ordinary people. He was about to sit up, but his sore muscles immediately made him give up the idea, and he had to continue lying in bed. Oh my god, dear Lawrence, you are finally awake. A man's voice suddenly appeared at the door of the room, but Lawrence was not familiar with this voice at all. So Lawrence turned his head with difficulty and looked at the door, only to see a slender man in his 20s standing there, wearing a white gentleman's suit and a feathered turban on his head. "Who are you?" Although he was very uncomfortable, Lawrence still struggled to sit up, leaned against the head of the bed, and asked the visitor. The man was stunned for a moment, then quickly explained, "It's me, Carlo Bonaparte, your brother." Carlo Bonaparte? Lawrence scratched his head, always feeling that he had heard this name somewhere, and it was in an important period of history. Carlo was not surprised to see that Lawrence did not speak, just thinking that his body had not recovered yet, and continued to comfort him. "I was really scared when I heard the big explosion yesterday. Fortunately, God bless you, and let you come here safely." So Carlo clapped his hands outside the door and shouted loudly, "Hey, dear, can you bring us 2 glasses of wine?" A soft female voice outside the door responded, and soon a woman with a headscarf came in with 2 glasses of crystal wine in her hands. "This is my love, Maria Letizia Amelino," Carlo introduced to Lawrence. Maria smiled and nodded to Lawrence, and at the same time, looked at him a few more times with some concern, and then put the wine on the bedside table. Carlo Bonaparte, Maria Letizia Amelino, Bonaparte family, Corsica. Lawrence finally remembered who this couple was. Carlo Bonaparte, the heir of the old Count Bonaparte, and his wife Maria Letizia Amelino. Aren't they the parents of Napoleon Bonaparte? So, if I'm Carlo's younger brother, then I'm Napoleon's uncle. Lawrence couldn't help but twitch his mouth and thought silently. Chapter 4 Meeting with the Governor. 7 days have passed since Lawrence was found by Carlo and taken home to settle down. During these days, Lawrence has roughly figured out the relationship around him. Carlo Bonaparte is his own brother, a member of the Corsica Republic, and a famous local lawyer, so he wrote a letter to invite Lawrence to come to Corsica to serve. But no one expected that the White Rose would suffer such an accident. As for Corsica, it was originally the territory of the Republic of Genoa, but due to excessive taxes, the islanders rose up and established their own republic. However, the Genoese were not completely expelled from the island. They still controlled some citizen fortresses in northern Corsica and were ready to make a comeback at any time. Another thing that made Lawrence a little regretful was that the future French Emperor Napoleon had not been born yet. According to the trajectory of history, the conqueror who made all of Europe tremble would not be born for another year. Lawrence also hoped that the butterfly effect of his appearance would not affect this future. Although Lawrence did not expect to become successful with his unborn nephew, as a history enthusiast, he also wanted to see Napoleon the Great, a figure who shocked the ancient and modern times. During the days of recuperation, Lawrence was also sorting out his memories of Corsica in history. As a history enthusiast in his previous life, Lawrence soon found himself at a rather embarrassing note. It was early January 1768, and by May, the Genoese would choose to abandon Corsica and sell it to the French. In history, Corsica has since become a French territory. Lawrence from the 21st century knows the importance of information gaps. The historical knowledge he has mastered is the greatest wealth at the moment, and he must use this information to create an advantage. Just as Lawrence was worrying about how to use this knowledge, Carlo pushed open Lawrence's door. "Hey, Lawrence, how are you?" Carlo walked in and saw Lawrence looking at a map of Corsica intently and obsessively, and couldn't help but care about it helplessly. Carlo has become accustomed to this weird brother. Whenever Lawrence has free time these days, he would point at the map, and no one knows what he is studying. Lawrence put his finger down from the map and responded, "I'm basically recovered. Thank you for your concern." During these few days of getting along, Lawrence was also very grateful to this brother. Although Carlo is usually very rough, he does have deep feelings for his younger brother and takes care of him meticulously. Carlo was relieved to learn that his brother was no longer in good health, and then began to talk about today's business. It's time to find the governor of Corsica to arrange a position for Lawrence. The governor of the Republic of Corsica? This is a big shot, Lawrence said with a little worry. Carlo smiled bitterly and waved his hand, saying, "What a big shot. After all, the Republic of Corsica has not been recognized by the courts of various countries. Until now, the outside world still thinks that we are under the rule of the Genoese. Although he is called the governor, He is just the leader of more than 30,000 people on this island. I'm a member of parliament, but I'm just a representative of a small western city. My daily expenses still depend on my income as a lawyer. Lawrence nodded, knowing that Carlo was being modest. The identity of a member of parliament must have brought him a lot of convenience. At least his legal career was so prosperous, because the client was interested in his identity as a member of parliament. After that, Carlo personally found a set of neat gentleman's suits for Lawrence, and urged him to change into them quickly. Looking at the clothes and accessories piled up like a small mountain on the bed, Lawrence could only smile helplessly, missing the vest and big shorts style of dressing in his previous life. The most prosperous city in the entire Corsica island is Ajaccio, so the governor's palace of the Republic of Corsica was also located here. However, what surprised Lawrence was that Carlo's mansion was not far from the governor's mansion. It only took a quarter of an hour to walk there. To have a big house in such a strategic location, it seemed that this brother's status in the governor's mansion was probably not low. After walking for a while, the two came to a large iron gate decorated with complicated patterns. The iron gate was very spacious and could accommodate 2 4-horse carriages at a time. On both sides of the gate were white high walls that stretched for hundreds of meters. There were watchtowers every 50 meters or so, and there were armed guards guarding them all day long. It seems that the security here is not very good. The defense is so meticulous. Lawrence looked at it for a while and analyzed to Carlo casually. Carlo nodded in approval and added, "The Genoese have been trying to assassinate the governor for more than a decade. After all, he is the leader of all Corsica." The two walked towards the gate. The 4 guards on duty at the gate obviously knew Carlo and saluted him in unison. "Member Carlo, welcome." As for Lawrence, since he was brought by Carlo, the guards simply searched him and let him in. The mansion is quite large. There are 7 or 8 collective apartments for servants alone. Other entertainment facilities such as private gardens, cricket rooms, and billiard rooms are also available. This was the residence of the governor of Genoa before. After Genoa was driven out of Ajaccio, it was naturally taken over by the Republic of Corsica. Of course, Lawrence and Carlo were not here to travel today. After entering the gate, they walked straight to a 2-story building facing the gate. After undergoing a more rigorous body search, they finally saw the leader of all Corsicans. His name is Pasquale Paoli. Although he is called the general of the Corsica state, the Corsicans are more accustomed to calling him the governor. Paoli met the two in the study. At this time, he was wearing a silver wig and leaning over the table to review something. It was not until the two walked to the desk that Paoli suddenly raised his head and asked them to sit down. "Ah, Carlo, you are here." Paoli simply greeted Carlo and then focused his eyes on Lawrence. "So, this is what you said, your brother, Mr. Lawrence Bonaparte." Paoli stared at Lawrence with a sharp gaze and slowly said, "I'm glad that you are willing to join the Corsican independence cause like your brother. A correct version in the 16-9 book bar. It's Milner." Lawrence responded politely. Paoli nodded and said casually, "Originally, all public offices in Corsica need to be elected by the masses. But since your brother Carlo strongly recommends you, I also believe in Carlo's judgment." Lawrence did not speak. He knew that this phenomenon of favoritism would never disappear in any era. "So, what public office should be assigned to you?" Paoli looked Lawrence up and down, seemingly very entangled, but in fact he had already made up his mind. "The patrol team in Ajaccio is still short of a deputy captain. Mr. Lawrence, what do you think?" "Deputy captain?" Before Lawrence could respond, Carlo frowned first. Carlo knew very well that, although the position of deputy captain was also a lucrative one, dealing with many merchants and businessmen on weekdays, there was a lot of money to be made, but there was almost no room for political advancement. After all, people who make small profits from the masses must be notorious, and they can't expect to have their own votes in any election. Paoli also had ulterior motives in choosing this position. Objectively speaking, this was indeed a lucrative position, enough to shut Carlo up. At the same time, it can also prevent Carlo's influence in the Corsican parliament from expanding further. "I will never allow 2 Bonapartes to appear in the Corsican parliament." Paoli made up his mind. Before Carlo could make any protest, Lawrence smiled and nodded first, saying, "This is indeed a good public office." "Oh. So Mr. Lawrence accepted it?" I have prepared your appointment letter in advance." Paulie was overjoyed when he heard it and said repeatedly. After that, Paulie accurately pulled out a piece of hard parchment from a pile of documents on the desk and handed it over. At the same time, he was secretly happy. He is indeed a young boy, and he was sent away with a little benefit. But, however, Lawrence suddenly changed the subject and said, "I heard that those who have made contributions to Corsica will definitely be rewarded." Paulie frowned slightly, not knowing what Lawrence was trying to say, so he had to force his smile and nodded, saying, "Of course, it's the same everywhere. If Mr. Lawrence can drive the Genoese in the north back to Italy, you can sit on my chair." Lawrence remained calm, still smiling, and said slowly, "I don't have that much ability. I can only contribute a piece of news to Governor Paulie." "Oh, what news?" Paulie and Carlo said in unison. Both of them were interested in Lawrence's words. "A piece of news that can save Corsica." Chapter 5 Situation on Kochi Island. Save Corsica? Paulie waved his hands immediately after hearing this, completely losing interest, and said mercilessly, "Young man, you should be glad that your brother is Senator Carlo, otherwise I would throw you out like a lunatic." Carlo on the side was also worried, fearing that Lawrence would act recklessly and end up not even getting the position of deputy captain. Lawrence took a breath pretending to be calm, and what he said next was full of gambling. Governor Paulie should have noticed that the Genoese have been much more passive in recent invasions and attacks. Paulie, who had just lost interest, immediately looked up, stared at Lawrence, and asked, "How did you know? Carlo, did you tell him?" Carlo waved his hands in confusion. "He didn't even know about this." "No, I don't know either. Only you, the governor, can review the army's report." Lawrence ignored Paulie's question and said to himself, "If I'm not mistaken, the frequency of supplies to the Genoese fortress has also decreased." Paulie was silent for a moment, then looked at Lawrence in confusion for a while, and admitted, "Yes, in the past 6 months, the frequency of supply ships arriving from Genoa has changed from twice a month to once a month." "So, the Genoese are ready to withdraw from Corsica?" Carlo said excitedly. In his opinion, all these signs indicate that Genoa has given up fighting the Corsicans. Seeing that Paulie was silent, Lawrence added, "Indeed, the Genoese are likely to give up Corsica, but this may not be a good thing for Corsica." "Not a good thing? Why?" Carlo was stunned and asked subconsciously. Lawrence did not speak, but glanced at Paulie, who had a few cold sweats on his forehead. "So, do you have definite news?" Paulie finally sighed and asked Lawrence after a long struggle. Lawrence no longer pretended to be mysterious at this moment, and answered directly, "If the status quo remains, the Genoese will reach an agreement with the French in May. This year, the French will try to land on Corsica." After hearing this, Paulie was silent again. Long before, he had guessed this possibility from various signs, but he was just not sure. "Where did the news come from? Is it accurate?" Paulie asked cautiously. Lawrence certainly couldn't say that this was written by later history, so he made up a reason in advance. "A noble gathering in Florence. Make sure it's accurate." "Oh, I remember. The Bonaparte family is a noble family in Florence. This is normal." Paulie nodded and said, acknowledging the accuracy of the news. "At these gatherings, noble gentlemen always couldn't help drinking excessive amounts of wine, and finally revealed shocking secrets in drunkenness. This is not uncommon in the whole of Europe. The Bonaparte family is a low-ranking noble family in Florence, and this identity has been recognized by the French civil service in history." Wait, what do you mean? How is this related to the French?" Looking at the two chatting one by one, Carlo hurriedly asked in confusion. He had neither Lawrence's historical knowledge nor Governor Paula's information channels, so he was confused when he heard it. Paulie did not answer Carlo's question directly, but nodded slightly to Lawrence, indicating that he should explain. Paulie also wanted to take this opportunity to see what this young man thought of the situation in the northern Mediterranean. Seeing that Paulie was talking to him, Lawrence did not refuse and analyzed directly. 5 years ago, in 1763, do you remember what happened? Carlo shook his head blankly. He was only 17 years old at that time. Paulie nodded knowingly and replied, "You are talking about the war between the British and Prussians against the French and Austrians. It lasted for 7 years. The peace treaty was not signed until 5 years ago. Yes, France was the defeated country in this war. They lost almost all of their overseas colonies, including the entire Canada and French India, as well as a large area of land in North America. Lawrence continued to add, the loss of overseas colonies forced the French to turn their attention back to Europe. At the same time, because of the tragic defeat in the war, the prestige of King Louis XV also plummeted, and public opinion in the country was boiling. When the internal contradictions of the French continued to deepen, they would inevitably transform them into external contradictions. Internal contradictions transformed into external contradictions. Paulie repeated this sentence in surprise. He had not heard such incisive words for a long time, especially from an 18-year-old young man. Moreover, Lawrence's analysis of the internal contradictions in France was beyond Paulie's expectations. Although he thought that the French might take over Corsica, after hearing Lawrence's analysis, Paulie realized that he might have underestimated the French's determination to get Corsica. So, what is your conclusion? Paulie asked impatiently. Lawrence was well prepared for this and answered skillfully, Louis XV needs to expand his territory in Europe to restore his prestige. Corsica, which is poor, weak, and abandoned by Genoa, is his best choice. As soon as the words came out, the study fell into a brief silence. The three of them understood that the French would not be easily expelled like the Genoese. The French line infantry would ruthlessly destroy the resistance forces on Corsica. Paulie knew in his heart that, if Lawrence's news was true, then the opportunity to save Corsica would be in the short few months before May. What do you think, Governor Paulie? Lawrence looked at the silent Paulie and asked tentatively. What you said makes sense. So how do you think Corsica should deal with it? Paulie looked at Lawrence eagerly and commented with praise. Although Paulie has been in charge of the Republic of Corsica for 13 years, he couldn't think of a reasonable countermeasure for a while. Check out the correct version on 16:9 book bar. In front of the behemoth kingdom of France, the small island of Corsica with a population of only more than 30,000 is like a lonely boat. Looking at Paulie's eager eyes, Lawrence secretly rejoiced that his words were not in vain. The information and analysis he provided have successfully attracted Paulie's interest, so it's time to bring the topic back to the original issue of public office. Lawrence has no feelings for this piece of land. Compared with the future fate of Corsica, he is more concerned about his own safety and interests at this moment. To be honest, Governor Paul, I do have some ideas, but Lawrence deliberately dragged out the end of the sentence, causing Paul to frown and ask, but what? It's just that I, the deputy captain of a patrol team, actually gave advice to the governor, which is probably a bit inappropriate. Lawrence said with pretended regret. Paul couldn't help but twitch his mouth a few times after hearing this. He didn't expect that this kid was still thinking about his public office. But after all, he had to ask for help, so Paul could only laugh dryly and nodded repeatedly, saying, this is my negligence, neglecting a scholar like Mr. Lawrence. Let's do this. I decide to appoint you as an additional staff officer of the governor's office, and you can enter and leave the governor's office freely like Senator Carlo, and you can meet with me at any time to make suggestions. Although this staff officer position looks like a nominal position without real power, Lawrence's eyes lit up. At the current stage, as long as you can directly contact the political center of Corsica, it doesn't matter whether you have real power or not. However, Paulie still kept a hand and forced the position of deputy patrol captain to Lawrence, which also restricted Lawrence's development in the political arena. After another round of greetings, Lawrence agreed to come back to give Paulie detailed advice soon, and then left the governor's mansion with Carlo. My god, dear Lawrence, I didn't expect you to be so knowledgeable. Carlo walked on the road, holding two appointment letters from Paulie to Lawrence in his arms. If the position of deputy captain was obtained by relying on Carlo's relationship, then the position of staff officer was obtained entirely by Lawrence's knowledge and eloquence. Although Carlo was extremely excited, Lawrence was calm in his heart. He knew that a so-called staff officer of the Republic of Corsica was a very small person in this era. Even his name would not appear in any history book in the future. If Lawrence wanted to leave his mark in this era, he still had a long way to go. Chapter 6. First meeting with Anna. On the second day, after receiving the appointment letter, Lawrence planned to move out of Carlo's mansion, after having a stable source of income. Although Carlo enthusiastically expressed that there were plenty of rooms and hoped that Lawrence could stay and live together, Lawrence still declined. First, Lawrence was preparing to set up his own power in Ajaccio and still needed his own residence. Second, he did not want to disturb Carlo and Maria's child-making activities. If this affected the birth of Napoleon in the future, it would not be good. When Lawrence came to Corsica, he was empty-handed, with only the dagger given to him by Grosso. Therefore, he did not pack any luggage, but left with a few pieces of luggage that Maria had packed for him. After leaving Carlo's house, Lawrence first took 2 appointment letters to the Corsica Finance Bureau to receive his first salary, and then the monthly salary would be delivered to Lawrence's mansion by the postman. It is called the Finance Bureau, but it is just an office building converted from a 3-story single-family apartment. The Corsicans did not use the currencies of other countries, but minted and issued 2 currencies on their own. Because they were mixed with a certain amount of real gold and silver, the locals simply referred to them as gold coins and silver coins. Since the prices of gold and silver are constantly changing, the official has not stipulated the exchange relationship between gold coins and silver coins to avoid the financial phenomenon of bad money driving out good money. However, the residents on the island are accustomed to the ratio of 1 gold coin to 20 silver coins when conducting small denomination transactions. Of course, due to its proximity to France, residents occasionally use French livres and écus directly for transactions. However, given the chaotic monetary system in France, the circulation of these 2 currencies is still very small. Combined with the price level of Corsica, Lawrence also roughly estimated that 3 gold coins could maintain the basic needs of a poor person for a month. However, due to the huge gap between the rich and the poor in the 18th century, the monthly expenses of a decent middle-class family could even reach more than 100 gold coins. The monthly salary of the deputy captain is only 30 gold coins, and the staff officer is better, with 50 per month. Lawrence looked at the salary stipulated in the appointment letter and shook his head helplessly. This amount of money is not enough to maintain a decent middle-class life, let alone to achieve something. It's really a penny that makes a hero fall. Lawrence walked out of the finance bureau, carrying a bag of rustling gold coins, and couldn't help but sigh. The next important thing is to find a place to stay. Ajaccio is not big, but it is home to nearly half of the population of Corsica. The whole city can be roughly divided into 4 areas. The West City district is close to the bay, and most of the residents are dock workers, dock sailors and the poorest people. The public security is also the most dangerous. The East City district is completely opposite. Because of its high terrain, it can overlook the entire Ajaccio, and it is the location of the governor's palace. It has become the residence of the Corsican dignitaries. Carlo's mansion is in the East City district. As for the North and South districts, they are the gathering places for ordinary people, small businessmen and craftsmen. Considering his not so rich income, Lawrence had to choose to rent an apartment in the North and South districts. However, the process of finding a house made Lawrence a little difficult. There was no such thing as a real estate agent in a small city like Ajaccio. Lawrence had to run around the streets like a headless fly. Occasionally, he saw a property listed for rent, but it did not meet Lawrence's requirements for various reasons. Alas, although I often cursed the real estate agents in my previous life, it would be inconvenient without these people. Lawrence stood on the street and wiped the sweat from his forehead. He had been here for a whole morning, but he still couldn't find a place he liked. "Sir, are you looking for a house?" Just when Lawrence was at a loss, he heard a timid and childish voice behind him. Lawrence turned his head and saw a girl with a disheveled face and a linen robe standing 5 or 6 meters behind him. Most of the girl's face was hidden under the grey hood, but Lawrence could still see her blue eyes. At this moment, she was looking at Lawrence from a distance, and she didn't seem to dare to move forward. How do you know?" Lawrence responded while looking at the girl. Judging from her height and voice, she was probably only 15 or 16 years old. And this linen dress, she was undoubtedly a girl from a poor family. Hearing Lawrence's response, the girl became a little bolder and said, "Sir, you have been wandering around here for a while, and what you are holding in your hand should be a change of clothes. Besides, you should not be a Corsican." Oh. Lawrence became interested. He didn't see any difference between himself and the Corsicans, so he asked, "How do you know this?" "First of all, the dagger you are wearing is a style commonly used by Italian sailors." The girl pointed to the dagger on Lawrence's waist timidly, and then added, "Then your shirt, only Italians like collars with pleats, and the collars of Corsican gentlemen are all flat." After hearing this, Lawrence subconsciously touched the collar, and it was indeed wrinkled. This shirt was worn on the White Rose at the time, which shows that the girl's analysis is correct. So I guessed. "Please don't be angry, sir." The girl looked at Lawrence's face cautiously, and then said carefully, "You are probably a traveler from Italy, carrying your luggage, and looking for a place to stay. Not bad, not bad." Lawrence nodded in surprise and satisfaction. He didn't expect that the girl he met on the street was so proficient in observing people's words and expressions. As he said that, Lawrence took out 3 gold coins from his purse and held them between his fingers. The glittering coins were particularly dazzling in the afternoon sun and immediately caught the girl's eyes. A child from the slums like her didn't even know what the texture of the gold coins felt like in her hands. A perfect version in the 16-9 book bar. "I'm indeed looking for a place to live. If you can find one that meets my requirements, the money will be yours." Lawrence shook the gold coins in his hand and said to the girl, and then added, "If you can satisfy me, I will even consider giving you a decent job." Decent job? The girl was stunned for 2 seconds. Since she learned to speak, she was thrown into the street by her parents and earned a few meager silver coins by providing guides for outsiders. Although she could barely fill her stomach, it was common for others to look down on her and insult her. "A decent job will even make others call me miss." Thinking of this, the girl nodded repeatedly like a chicken pecking at rice and said, "Leave it to me, sir. My name is Anna." Lawrence nodded with satisfaction and stated his requirements. "Very good. I want an apartment. It must be a single family house with a basement, preferably with multiple floors. The area must be spacious, located in the north and south urban areas, and facing the street, and the furniture must be complete, and the rent cannot exceed 50 gold per month." "Do you need to repeat it?" "I have written it down, sir." Anna was very focused and wrote down all of Lawrence's requirements after just listening once. "Okay, I will come here again at noon tomorrow. I hope you won't let me down. By the way, this is the deposit," Lawrence said, throwing a gold coin to Anna. This was the first time Anna received a whole gold coin. She opened her mouth excitedly, but didn't know what to say. Her dusty face also turned ruddy. After bowing deeply to Lawrence, she turned around and ran out, and soon disappeared at the corner of the street. "This child can be of great use." Lawrence looked at the back of the girl who left a deep impression on him, and couldn't help but sigh. Although he had obtained 2 public positions, Lawrence still didn't know the city of Ajaccio. If Anna was recruited, it would save a lot of trouble. Seeing that the housing problem was basically solved, Lawrence should report to his position. The work of the staff didn't require Lawrence to worry about it every day. He just had to wait for Governor Paulie to summon him. Therefore, Lawrence still needed to worry about the position of deputy captain of the patrol team. "I hope it will go smoothly." Lawrence sighed and prepared to report to the Ajaccio patrol team. But he also knew that as an airborne deputy captain, he might have to go through a lot of trouble to convince his subordinates. Chapter 7 Taking Office. Although he was not familiar with Ajaccio, Lawrence still found the patrol station by asking for directions. Like other official institutions of the Republic of Corsica, the patrol station was also very simple. It directly used a small bunker built by the Genoese in the city as its station. Due to years of disrepair, the bunker was covered with moss, and many of the bricks on it had fallen off. There were many hollow places on the walls. If it weren't for the flag of the Republic of Corsica hanging on the bunker, Lawrence would have thought it was a historic site. It was afternoon, and the door of the station was open, so Lawrence walked straight in. After understanding it in advance, Lawrence also understood that this patrol team actually served as a police officer, and the scale was not large, with only about 50 people. After all, the total population of Ajaccio was less than 20,000, even less than the population of a town in Lawrence's previous life. The bunker in the station had 4 floors in total. The second and third floors were guards' dormitories, and the top floor was a small arsenal and storage room. There is also a basement, which is used as a dungeon to detain captured suspects waiting for trial. Although Lawrence heard rumors that the number of prisoners held by the patrol team is 5 times more than that of the Corsica prison. The first floor is an open hall, which is used to receive visitors and citizens who report crimes. However, in the eyes of the Corsicans who advocate revenge, reporting crimes seems to be the only option when there is no other choice. Therefore, when Lawrence entered the door, there were only a few guards on duty in the hall. Huh? What are you doing here? A guard stood up from his chair with some displeasure after noticing someone coming in, but he restrained himself after seeing Lawrence's dress and asked, "People like Lawrence, who have fair skin, wear shirts and scarves, are not the same as those slum dwellers who are easily bullied." Lawrence did not reply, but looked at the guards present. They were sitting around a wooden table, on which were 2 large bottles of rum and several crooked wooden cups. Looking at the faces of these people, all of them had vacant eyes and red faces. I don't know how much strong rum they drank. The guard who had just asked the question saw that Lawrence didn't answer and was even looking at their wine glasses. He couldn't help but get angry and pointed at Lawrence's nose and shouted, "Hey, I'm asking you a fucking question. If you don't have a good reason to come in, I'll throw you to the dungeon." Lawrence glanced around coldly and understood why Paulie threw him to this patrol team. If it were an ordinary person, he would probably be assimilated by this group of guards who were just sitting there doing nothing and oppressing the masses. At that time, he would definitely be despised by everyone, and then he would lose his mass base in politics. The guard continued to insult, and the unbearable words kept coming out. The other guards looked at Lawrence with a smile on their faces, treating him as a joke after drinking. But Lawrence didn't want to waste time with these people at all. He pulled out the dagger from his waist and pointed the tip of the knife at the nose of the rude guard. What? The guard sobered up immediately. They didn't expect that someone would dare to cause trouble in the garrison. They stood up from the table in a hurry, drew the sword from their waist, and went forward to subdue Lawrence. Lawrence's expression did not change. He continued to point the knife at the guards with his right hand. He reached into his arms with his left hand and took out the appointment letter and held it in front of his chest, shouting, "I'm Napoleon Bonaparte, a nobleman of Florence, the brother of Senator Carlo Bonaparte, the staff officer of Governor Paoli, the deputy captain of the Ajaccio patrol, your superior. How dare you point a sword at me?" The loud voice echoed in the empty hall, causing waves of echoes. The soldiers were even more shocked after hearing this. Although they could not verify the previous series of titles, the identity of this deputy captain was written in black and white on the appointment letter. The appointment letter had the autograph of Governor Paoli and his personal seal, which did not seem to be forged. Several guards looked at each other, hesitantly put down their swords, and the man who was pointed at by Lawrence broke out in a cold sweat, staggered back a few steps, and stood with his companions. Lawrence snorted coldly and put the dagger back at his waist, but the tense atmosphere between the two sides continued. At this moment, a short old man with grey hair suddenly stood up among the guards. If he hadn't stood with other guards, Lawrence would never have associated him with the image of a soldier. The old man took 2 steps forward and laughed dryly a few times. The flattering smile filled his whole face, as if he was not there when he pointed the sword at Lawrence. "Ahem, sir. Please forgive our impoliteness. We are really blind," the old man said, bowing to Lawrence in a funny way, and continued, "Everyone calls me Old Scene. I have been here since the first day the patrol was established. I'm willing to serve you, sir." Lawrence squinted and glanced at Scene. This guard, who was a head shorter than him, must be in his 50s or 60s. He was definitely one of the most experienced people in the patrol. In addition, Old Scene was able to make peace with Lawrence in a very short time, as if nothing had happened, and came to offer his services. It seems that he is also a very good person. Although Lawrence has always despised such people, if he wants to gain a foothold in the patrol as quickly as possible, Lawrence still cannot do without Old Scene's help. Thinking of this, Lawrence's tone also softened a lot, and he said to everyone, "This time, I will not pursue your dereliction of duty, and it will not happen again. Your name is Old Scene, right? Take me to get my things." "Yes, yes, yes." Old Scene agreed first, then turned his head and winked at everyone, and the other guards answered yes loosely. This scene was also seen by Lawrence, and he thought, it seems that this little old man still has some prestige. It's better to start with him and gain a foothold here as soon as possible. Then, Old Scene led Lawrence upstairs to the storage room on the 4th floor to get his uniform, sword, and seal. During the casual chat upstairs, Lawrence also learned some information from Old Scene. In the 16:9 book, read the correct version. In addition to Lawrence, the patrol team also has a deputy captain and a captain. However, these two people live in Ancheng district and have their own industries. They don't come to work in the garrison on weekdays. Lawrence snorted coldly after learning about it. It stands to reason that a deputy captain's monthly salary is only 50 gold coins. How can he live in the East City district, not to mention having his own property? It seems that they have a good way to make money. However, this also means that Lawrence is the highest officer here at ordinary times, which makes it easier for him to show his skills in the team. Old Scene took Lawrence to the 4th floor. It seemed that no one had been here for too long. The spider webs on the ceiling were almost falling to the floor. Every time Lawrence stepped on it, he could step on a grey mark on the ground. The patrol team's only 10 or so smoothbore rifles were stored here, but they had a thick layer of dust on them and no one had used them for a long time. Old Scene scratched his head embarrassedly and explained that they usually patrolled and investigated cases, and they didn't need these things to deal with some hooligans, and if they faced enemies with muskets, the Corsican military would probably go directly to them, and it wouldn't be their turn. These flintlock smoothbore rifles were idle. Lawrence shook his head helplessly. He didn't intend to pursue these things today. Then Old Scene went into the storage room and searched for a long time before finding what Lawrence wanted, a blue and white uniform, which looked very similar to the uniform of a French line private soldier, probably a copy. There was also a silver star badge on the chest of the uniform, showing the identity of the deputy captain. In addition, there was his seal, which was also an important item to prove his identity. As for the sword, Lawrence waved his hand to indicate that he didn't want it. He was more used to the short knife on his waist, which Grosso gave him. However, when Old Scene came out, he also took an exquisitely crafted flintlock pistol, as well as embroidered gunpowder bags and bullet bags. This is left by the previous captain. It's not good to let it gather dust here. Why not let Captain Bonaparte take it too? Old Scene smiled and stuffed the pistol and 2 bags into Lawrence's hands. Lawrence did not refuse and glanced at Old Scene with a squint. He saw at a glance that Old Scene was showing goodwill to him, but thinking that he would use this person in the future, he directly hung the pistol and 2 bags on his waist. Just when Old Scene thought that Lawrence would go back to his business after going through the formalities like the other 2 officers, he never expected that Lawrence would put on his uniform directly and then ordered, "By the way, Old Scene, take me to the dungeon." Dungeon? What are we going there for? Old Scene looked confused. Prepare to kill someone. Lawrence calmly uttered 2 chilling words. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 8, Establishing Authority. The next day, it was still early in the morning, and the hard-working Corsicans living in the North and South districts had already climbed out of bed and started a busy new day. However, the alert citizens soon discovered the changes. A simple and spacious platform was built in the open space in front of the gate of the patrol station at the junction of the North and South districts. On the platform stood a young man in a patrol uniform with a straight figure. However, the young man also wore a shining silver star on his chest, which showed his status. In the past 10 years, the patrol team was only willing to perform its duties in the East District, and they were rarely seen in the North and South Districts. This also made the masses more curious about what the platform was going to do here today. Standing on the platform was Lawrence. At this moment, he looked serious and unsmiling. Although Lawrence did not say a word, it attracted the interest of the citizens even more. The news that the patrol team was going to have an activity quickly spread throughout the North and South districts. By the morning, there were already hundreds of citizens around the platform, surrounding the surrounding streets. There was a buzz of discussion all around, and the topic was all about Lawrence and his patrol team. Lawrence glanced at the crowd below and estimated that the time was ripe, so he gestured to the bunker in the garrison. Old Scene saw Lawrence's gesture inside, nodded helplessly, and began to regret bringing Lawrence to the dungeon yesterday. Old Scene also changed into the patrol uniform today, and he was immediately in high spirits. After receiving Lawrence's gesture, Old Scene took a prepared wooden board and trotted up to the platform, placing the board in the most conspicuous position of the platform. On the board, there was only a huge word written in eye-catching red paint. Trial. The citizens below began to discuss. Trial? Who are they going to judge? They won't judge us poor people, right? Humph, this is something these bastards can do. That's right, they are so shameless to talk about trial. Old Scene stood beside Lawrence, and he could hear the ridicule of the citizens below him clearly. Even a thick-skinned man like him couldn't help but blush after hearing these words. Lawrence glanced at Old Scene and said calmly, "This is how you are in people's minds." Old Scene hesitated for a long time and didn't say anything. Then Lawrence deliberately paused for a while, letting the ridicule and discussion below continue to ferment, so that the emotions of the citizens reached a climax. Seeing that the young officer on the stage did not react at all, the citizens below gradually became bolder, and even some people who were busy with troubles deliberately organized the citizens to shout, "Get down! Get down! Get down!" Seeing that the sound waves were getting higher and higher, the situation was about to get out of control. Just when the emotions of the citizens reached a climax, Lawrence quickly pulled out the loaded pistol from his waist, pointed it at the sky, and pulled the trigger. Bang! A loud gunpowder explosion immediately shocked all the citizens present, and the sound wave soon calmed down. The citizens all stared at Lawrence with wide eyes, not knowing what the officer wanted to do. When the entire square fell silent, Lawrence nodded with satisfaction and shouted loudly, "Citizens, my compatriots, I'm the chief of the patrol, Lawrence Bonaparte." The onlookers listened patiently, and Lawrence continued to shout, "Our motherland is being invaded by sinners. Our cradle is surrounded by the gasps of victims and the tears of the desperate. In the slums of the West City District and the streets of the North and South City Districts, when I saw those dirty and illegal chaos, I felt the blood rushing up, and I immediately decided to dispel these hazes. The crimes of sinners must be washed away by the blood of sinners, and I swear to make them pay the price." Although Lawrence's speech was passionate, the public would not be moved by a few nice words, and Lawrence had to take corresponding actions. "Come on, bring the people up." Lawrence raised his arms to the inside of the station, and then a group of patrolmen escorted 3 strong men with naked upper bodies, hands tied behind their backs, and wearing black hoods to the high platform. Old Scene whispered to Lawrence uneasily, "Lord Bonaparte, do you really want to execute these people? Do you really not need to ask the captain for permission?" Lawrence glanced coldly and said nonchalantly, "The captain is still in his mansion enjoying the fine Bordeaux wine brought by the maid. When he is not here, I will be your highest commander. Yes, yes." Old Scene wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and took 2 steps back tactfully, knowing that he could not persuade Lawrence. As for how much shock Lawrence's willful behavior would bring to Ajaccio, Old Scene could not imagine it. The citizens in the audience held their breath and stared at the 3 strong men on the stage, looking forward to Lawrence's next move. Lawrence led one of them to the front of the platform so that all the onlookers could see him, and then kicked him in the calf mercilessly, making him kneel on the stage. Lawrence did not speak, but took off the man's hood directly. At the moment when the hood was taken off, a middle-aged woman in an apron in the crowd screamed, "Ah, God, it's that beast." People immediately looked at the woman. In just a few seconds, the woman's face was already covered with tears, and she cried loudly, "It's this scum. The beast who insulted my daughter's innocence and dumped her body in the wilderness. Why is he still alive?" The woman's miserable cry spread to every corner of the square. Every citizen present couldn't help but look at this poor mother with sympathy. Some women who were also mothers couldn't help sobbing. Lawrence also bowed slightly to her with sympathy and apology, and then said loudly, "Fellow countrymen, how should we deal with such a villain?" The huge square was silent for a second, and then bursts of loud shouts broke out. These voices were still chaotic at first, but soon they were unified into the same words. forming a wave of voices that was higher than the other. A correct version in 1619 book bar. Trial. 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 Every Corsican with blood in his heart shouted from the bottom of his heart. Lawrence raised his flintlock pistol above his head and began to load gunpowder and lead bullets in front of all the citizens. No, no, no. You can't kill me. I'm a member of the Union. The prisoner kneeling on the ground looked at Lawrence with horror as he put the muzzle of the gun against his forehead and shouted tremblingly, "Go and talk to God." Lawrence said this expressionlessly and pulled the trigger without hesitation. A burst of white smoke spewed out from the muzzle of the gun, and the prisoner's head was already a bloody mess. After losing consciousness, he fell directly from the stage. Even so, his body was still trampled by the angry crowd. Lawrence did not pause and waved his hand to signal the second prisoner to come up and start loading ammunition in the same way. You. The prisoner looked at the end of the previous person and was so frightened that he couldn't speak. Fellow countrymen. Lawrence pressed the muzzle of the gun to the prisoner's head and explained loudly, "This man, who colluded with slave traders, sold our Corsican compatriots to America like livestock. How should we deal with him?" Trial. The citizens raised their right arms and shouted loudly. Bang. Another gunshot, and another bloody corpse fell from the stage, but Lawrence didn't even blink. The third prisoner was treated the same way. After Lawrence briefly informed him of his crimes, he shot him directly with a knife. As the bodies of the three evil men fell, the emotions of the citizens were completely ignited. They haven't had such a happy day for a long time, and Lawrence would not miss such an opportunity. He also raised his right arm and took the lead in shouting, "Justice will always be in Corsica." Hundreds of citizens responded in unison, "Justice will always be in Corsica. Justice will always be in Corsica." Chapter 9 Aftermath. It was close to noon, and more than an hour had passed since Lawrence's public execution, but the square outside the station was still crowded with people. Many citizens who missed the execution came to check on the situation, and even many poor people from the West City District and gentlemen from the East City District came. How about it? It feels much better to be treated as a hero than a villain. In the lobby of the station, Lawrence sat at the table and said to a group of patrolmen, although Lawrence was the protagonist of this execution, other patrolmen were also respected and admired by the citizens. In just over an hour, a large number of citizens spontaneously piled up flowers at the entrance of the station. At the same time, Lawrence also knew that, although this execution brought great prestige, it was only temporary. If he wanted to win the long-term respect of the citizens, he still had to look at the performance of the patrol team in the future. Therefore, how to correct the bad practices in the patrol team was also an imminent problem that gave Lawrence a headache. The patrolmen all scratched their heads and were embarrassed to reply to Lawrence. Although they did not commit any crimes on weekdays, they still took advantage of the citizens. Today, they were cheered by them, which made the patrolmen feel guilty. Seeing that all the guards lowered their heads in shame, Lawrence continued, "You have seen the people's expectations of you. Don't let them down." Although Lawrence did not expect that he could make them change their ways through a few words, it would have a significant educational effect to strike while the iron is hot at this opportunity. Just when Lawrence wanted to continue speaking, the door of the station was suddenly pushed open, and then two burly middle-aged men walked in. Both men were wearing uniforms, which were very similar to Lawrence's patrol uniforms, but they were green. At the same time, they also carried a smoothbore rifle with a bayonet and looked well trained. Lawrence glanced at them and recognized that they were soldiers from the Corsican Republic Army, and they seemed to be coming for him. The military power of Corsica was firmly in the hands of only one person, Governor Pauly, who was the general of the Corsican state. Therefore, it is self-evident who these two soldiers are representing. "Mr. Bonaparte, Governor Pauly invites you." As soon as the two soldiers entered the door, they said to Lawrence in a concise manner. Lawrence glanced at the wall clock and said casually, "Can we meet later? I have something to do later." At noon, Lawrence had an appointment with the slim girl Anna. Although the other party was of low status, Lawrence did not want to break the appointment. "I'm sorry, Mr. Bonaparte, we have received an order to invite you to the governor's mansion immediately." The soldier shook his head and said firmly. After hearing this, Lawrence frowned slightly. It seemed that Governor Paulie was very dissatisfied with the big scene he had created. If he refused, the two soldiers might use force to invite him over. Okay, let's go. Lawrence waved his hand helplessly, told Old Scene to control the situation, and then followed the soldiers to the governor's mansion. The second time Lawrence met the governor was still in the study. When he pushed the door open, Paulie was holding an exquisite teapot and pouring black tea into a white porcelain cup. "Ah, Lawrence, you're here." Paulie saw Lawrence come in and greeted him briefly. Lawrence nodded, walked to the desk, pulled out a chair and sat down. At the same time, he observed Paulie's face, which was indeed quite unhappy. So Lawrence took the initiative to smile and said, "What's wrong, Governor Paulie? You don't look very good." "Humph." Paulie snorted coldly and threw the teapot on the table in a somewhat unmannerly manner, and a lot of hot black tea splashed out. "You've only been in office for a few days, and you've caused such a big thing." Paulie rolled his eyes at Lawrence and said. Lawrence responded very easily, "Isn't it good? The people are very supportive." After hearing this, Paulie's beard was so angry that it curled up, and he said, "You executed those prisoners without a court trial. Just for this reason, I can dismiss you now." Faced with Paulie's threat, Lawrence remained unmoved. He knew that Paulie was a smart man, and that Paulie was now famous, and Paulie would not forcibly dismiss him against the will of the people. Even if Paulie wanted to deal with Lawrence, he would wait until the storm calmed down. By then, Lawrence believed that he could have other means to restrain Paulie. "This is indeed my mistake, but those three people are all guilty." Lawrence responded. "Guilty? You want to execute him just because one person is guilty? You don't even look at their identities." Paulie was even more angry when he heard this, pointing at Lawrence and saying, "If the King of France is guilty, do you want to push the King of France to the guillotine?" Lawrence looked at Paulie with a strange expression, thinking that he couldn't be a prophet, and replied casually, "Of course, maybe you can see that scene in your lifetime." Seeing that Paulie was about to get angry, Lawrence hurriedly brought the topic back to the point. "Ahem, what did Governor Paulie mean by looking at the identities of those people just now?" "Humph, didn't they tell you before they died?" Paulie snorted in dissatisfaction. "Read the correct version in 1619 book bar." Lawrence thought about it and said, "I think he said he was a member of a union or something." "That's right." Paulie slapped the table and said, "And it's the Dock Workers Union. Do you know what kind of organization that is?" Seeing Lawrence shaking his head in confusion, Paulie added, "It's a group of hooligans and gang members who have occupied more than 80% of the port work. The captains who load and unload cargo in Ajaccio have to give them some bribes." Lawrence nodded thoughtfully. This kind of dock gang is not uncommon all over the world. Even in later generations, some ports in backward areas still have such organizations. The three people Lawrence shot today were all union members. It was precisely because of this identity that they were able to stay in the patrol dungeon without being tried by the court. At this time, Lawrence also understood why Paulie was so angry. This dock union was also a difficult existence for Governor Paulie, and Lawrence was the deputy captain promoted by Paulie. Today, Lawrence shot 3 union members, which could easily be misunderstood by the union as Paulie's order and regarded as a signal of hostility. "Okay, I understand. That means you, the governor, took the blame for me," Lawrence said sincerely. After hearing this, Paulie's anger subsided a little, and he was also surprised at Lawrence's quick thinking, and he actually understood the interests behind it in a moment. "Humph, considering your brother and the favor of you providing information last time, I will not pursue you here, but there must not be a second time." After saying that, Paulie paused for a moment, then lowered his voice and said, "In addition, I will give you a kind reminder. Although I can come forward to block the official pressure from the dock union for you, their union is not a monolithic entity, and there will definitely be people who will avenge their brothers. Be careful yourself. You don't want your young and smart head to be cut off and thrown into the sea." Lawrence nodded solemnly, thanking Paulie for his reminder. After knocking Lawrence, Paulie quickly turned the topic to his most concerned issue, the fate of Corsica. It was less than half a year away from the May when Lawrence said France and Genoa would reach an agreement. Chapter 10 Countermeasures. What is the plan you mentioned last time that has a chance to save Corsica? Paulie crossed his hands, dragged his chin, and asked Lawrence very seriously. Lawrence did not speak rashly, but sorted out his thoughts a little. This meeting with Paulie is extremely important. Only if Lawrence's proposal can attract Paulie can the two of them stand on the same front completely. For Lawrence at this stage, Paulie's protection is indispensable to him. Paulie was able to turn a blind eye to Lawrence's usurpation of the execution just now, which was more or less because Lawrence might have a plan to save Corsica. "What do you think, Governor?" Lawrence asked cautiously. Paul took a sip of warm black tea to moisten his throat and said with a little helplessness, "I started to worry about this situation a few years ago, so I sent a large number of diplomatic envoys to the courts of various countries, hoping to be recognized as an independent country. I have asked for help from the Spaniards, the Neapolitans, and even the Venetians and Austrians. It's just that," Paul said with a wry smile, "the Corsican envoys were either turned away or made unacceptable demands." Lawrence nodded as he listened. Paul's approach was indeed understandable. In the case of such a huge gap in strength, using diplomatic means is indeed the best way. It's just that a weak and poor island country like Corsica has no bargaining chips in front of these European powers. After confirming that his plan was basically in line with Paulie's, Lawrence said, "From the current situation, diplomacy is indeed the best way. It's just that the object you chose is biased. Even if these big countries agree to protect Corsica, they will inevitably put forward corresponding conditions. By then, it will be nothing more than a sheep entering a tiger's mouth to a sheep entering a wolf's mouth. Oh, who should we ask for help? It won't be the British, right?" Paulie frowned and thought for a while, still not understanding who to seek for protection. Lawrence smiled mysteriously and said, "This country, Governor, you should be quite familiar with it." "Huh? What is it?" Paulie was even more puzzled. "Genoese." "What?" Paulie almost cried out, looked at Lawrence in disbelief, and said hurriedly, "Oh my god. Lawrence, if you say these words, when we first meet, I will definitely treat you as a Genoese spy and throw you into jail." "Governor Paulie, think about why we regard the French as imaginary enemies." Lawrence began to analyze. Paulie was stunned and said, "Of course it's because the Genoese will sell Corsica to the French. Then why don't we just stop them from reaching an agreement? After all, it's much easier to resist the Genoese than the French." Paulie leaned back in his chair, sighed, and said, "Although this is the truth, how can we do it? Are you going to sneak into Versailles and blow up the Genoese negotiation team?" Lawrence smiled, stood up, took a map of Corsica from the study, spread it on the table, and explained to Paulie, "Of course, we have to let the Genoese give up negotiations with the French. Governor, you see, nearly 90% of the territory on the island is now in the hands of the Corsicans, and the Genoese army can only retreat to the fortresses on the northern coast. Are you saying that we should show weakness and deliberately push the front line back?" Paulie touched his chin and understood what Lawrence meant. The main reason why Genoa wanted to give up Corsica was that they had almost no hope of regaining the entire island. Instead of spending a high price to continue to station troops on the island, it would be better to take the initiative to sell Corsica to the French, which could also make up for some fiscal revenue. Lawrence meant to take the initiative, to give in and deliberately let the Genoese army regain some territory, so as to make them believe that there was still a chance to take over the entire Corsica. Well, there is indeed a chance, but it is too risky. The Genoese may have completely lost interest in Corsica. Paulie thought for a moment, shook his head, and was not at ease with this plan. Lawrence also anticipated Paulie's reaction, and then said, "Of course, but this is just the first step. There is another important reason why Genoa will give up Corsica, that is, Corsica is too poor and has no value to them." Paulie was a little unhappy after hearing this, but he had to admit that this was indeed the truth. Although Ajaccio is also a famous port city on the Mediterranean, it is still too backward compared to the surrounding world-class port cities such as Toulon, Pisa, and Venice. That's true, but if Corsica was richer, it wouldn't be so isolated and helpless. Paul laughed bitterly and spread his hands helplessly. Lawrence pointed to the map on the table and said with a smile, "Then, if this poor island country suddenly discovered a silver mine or a gold mine, the situation would be very different." "Gold mine or silver mine?" Paul frowned and looked at the map on the table. "Corsica is a typical mountain island. The center of the island is a series of majestic and continuous mountains. Only in the marginal areas with relatively flat terrain are large-scale settlements suitable. Relying on these mountains, Corsica's mining industry is also relatively developed and is a major pillar of the country's finances. And in such a terrain, if a gold and silver vein is discovered, it is reasonable. But Paul is also very clear that he has been in Corsica for so many years, but he has never seen the shadow of a piece of gold and silver ore. Thinking about it this way, Lawrence's meaning is also very clear. Are you going to spread false news? A correct version at 16 to 9 bookbar. Paul didn't look up, still staring at the map on the table, and asked Lawrence. That's right. After the Genoese receive the news, they will definitely not discuss the sale of Corsica with the French before they find out that it is fake news. At the same time, we will take the initiative to shrink the front line and give them the confidence to regain Corsica. In this way, we don't have to face the threat of the French in a short time. The preparations have been almost done, and Lawrence directly revealed his plan. What makes Lawrence confident in this plan is that in his memory of his previous life, there is indeed a silver mine on Corsica, and it is a rich mine with extremely high content. As long as this vein can be explored before the Genoese expose their lies, Corsica's safety can be maintained for a long time. In this way, there is a good chance. However, this is just a delaying method after all. Paul nodded, which was considered to be affirmation of Lawrence's plan. Although in Paul's eyes, this is just a delaying tactic, there is not much time left before the agreement to sell Corsica is reached, so he can only adopt this plan first and make plans later. You can leave first. I still need to discuss this plan with the army and various congressmen. I will invite you to participate in the discussion. Paulie sighed, folded the map on the table, and put it away, indicating that Lawrence could leave. Lawrence stood up and walked to the door, looking back at Paulie, who was worried. He was obviously worried about what would happen to Corsica after the lie was exposed. Don't worry, Governor Paulie, maybe we can really find a silver mine. Lawrence comforted casually. After hearing this, Paulie suddenly raised his head, stared at Lawrence, and whispered, "Are you confident?" In Paulie's eyes, although this young man sometimes acted too boldly, it seemed that every step was within his expectations. It's just a premonition. Lawrence smiled. Is that so? Paulie said a little disappointedly, and then waved his hand to indicate that Lawrence could leave. After walking out of the governor's mansion, Lawrence couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. After reaching a consensus with Paulie, he had a real political backer in Corsica. Although this also has disadvantages, other political factions may regard Lawrence as Paulie's confidant and target him in various ways. However, at the current stage, holding Paulie's thigh will undoubtedly benefit Lawrence the most. Oh no, I have an appointment with Anna. Lawrence suddenly remembered the appointment with the poor girl, glanced at the clock tower in the governor's mansion. It was already past 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so he hurried to the street where he had agreed to meet. Chapter 11 All Men Are Created Equal. North City, Haybury Street. This is the place where Lawrence agreed to meet Anna, but now it is 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the sun is setting, and Anna still hasn't seen Lawrence. Yesterday at noon, Anna was excited for the whole day after accepting Lawrence's commission. The reward of 3 gold coins and the possibility of a decent job made Anna, who was huddled in a shabby shed at night, couldn't help but smile happily and sleepless all night. Therefore, when it was just dawn today, Anna got up from the bed and rushed to Haybury Street early to wait in advance. Where is that gentleman? Did he forget to come? Anna stared with her big blue eyes, carefully looking at all the pedestrians coming and going on the street, hoping to see the kind and young gentleman. 3 hours have passed since the agreed time, and Anna has been waiting anxiously in the same place, holding the gold coin that Lawrence paid her tightly in her hand. Although the citizens of the North City are not rich, they have maintained a minimum level of decency. Anna, who was covered in dirt, looked out of place standing on the street, where decent people were passing by. Huh. Why did a child from the slum come here? Why don't you go back? A fierce man was wandering idly on the street. Suddenly, he caught a glimpse of Anna in a tattered robe, and frowned and shouted at Anna. Anna bit her lip and her face was a little pale. In these years, in order to earn a few silver coins to fill her stomach, she didn't know how many such contempts and insults she had suffered. I'm sorry, sir. I'm waiting for someone. Anna lowered her head and whispered. Waiting for someone. The strong man pretended to be exaggerated and curled his lips, sneered and said, who do you want to wait for like this? It's like you crawled out of a pigsty. We can all smell the stench on you standing here. Anna buried her head in her hood, not daring to look them in the eye, and could only say repeatedly, I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry. What's wrong? Why don't you go back? The man saw that Anna was still standing there and couldn't help but frown. He was used to doing evil things on weekdays, but he didn't expect that a girl from the slums would dare to turn a deaf ear to his words. You little beast. You have to make me do it, right? The strong man approached with a grim smile and forced Anna to the wall. Passers-by just ignored it. Occasionally, someone frowned and looked over here, but no one had the intention to stop it. After all, she was a girl from the slums, and no one would risk standing up for her. The strong man had a ferocious face, stretched out his hand, and grabbed Anna's arm, and dragged it out vigorously. Anna's thin body, as thin as a bamboo pole, couldn't struggle free even with all her strength. In desperation, she opened her mouth and bit the strong man's arm. Ah, damn. You pig. The strong man shouted, and shook his arm away, with 2 rows of shallow blood marks on it. Then, in anger, he raised his fist as big as a casserole, and was about to swing it at the thin Anna. Anna closed her eyes in fear, and couldn't even cry out. In the blink of an eye, a loud explosion was heard. Bang! A bullet hole suddenly appeared in front of the sturdy man's feet, and several pieces of stone chips were thrown on his face. Who dares to shoot in the street? The sturdy man was startled, and he quickly put away his fist, and shouted at the top of his voice, looking back at the person who shot. Lawrence looked at them expressionlessly, and blew gently at the muzzle of the gun, to blow away the snow-white gunpowder. Because he had no time to change his clothes, Lawrence was still wearing the patrol uniform he wore in the morning, and a large piece of prisoner's blood was stained on his blue and white sweater. Wait. You are the one in the morning. The sturdy man widened his eyes and pointed at Lawrence and said repeatedly, and he had recognized Lawrence as the patrol officer who presided over the execution in the morning. Lawrence ignored his words and lowered his head to reload the lead bullets and gunpowder into the barrel. Sir. Anna didn't open her eyes until a long time after the gunshot. She was surprised to find that the gentleman she had been looking forward to and waiting for half a day was right in front of her. What do you want to do? The strong man swallowed uneasily and took 2 steps back nervously. Although he was much taller than Lawrence, the exquisitely crafted flintlock pistol in Lawrence's hand was not a decoration. In addition, he witnessed Lawrence's ruthless execution of 3 people in the morning, and the strong man was already extremely frightened. Anna quickly wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes and hurried behind Lawrence. The strong man squeezed out a flattering smile on his face, rubbed his hands, and said, Mr. Bonaparte, we don't have to fight for a slum bastard. Before he finished speaking, Lawrence shot another shot at the ground just a few inches in front of the strong man. The strong man was so frightened that he fell to his knees with a plop as soon as he heard the gunshot, crying and begging for mercy. Passers-by had noticed the situation here and recognized Lawrence in uniform, and they gathered around him. Lawrence looked at Anna with guilt and apologized. Sorry, Anna, I'm late today. Anna was still in shock, sobbing and saying repeatedly, it's okay, sir, it's okay. Reaching out and touching Anna's head, Lawrence couldn't help but sigh, then walked to the strong man kneeling on the ground and asked condescendingly, who did you say was a bastard just now? Sir, the strong man's voice trembled a little, glanced at Anna and said, isn't she just a lowly girl from the slums? Lawrence snorted coldly and asked loudly, you said she was a bastard? Is she a Corsican? Do you want to say that all Corsican compatriots are bastards? Read the correct version at 1619 book bar. I didn't. The strong man opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but was interrupted by Lawrence's cold voice. Open your mouth. Ah. The strong man was stunned, but when he thought of the fate of the people who were ruthlessly shot by Lawrence in the morning, he opened his mouth obediently. Lawrence waved his right hand and stuffed the barrel of the pistol directly into the strong man's mouth. The barrel, which had just been fired twice, still had a hot residual temperature at this time. As soon as it was put into the strong man's mouth, it made a sizzling sound and faint white smoke. The onlookers squeezed into a circle, but no one felt sorry for the strong man. Everyone who lived here knew that he was a well-known rogue in the neighborhood. Ah, ah, ah. The strong man's shouting lasted for several seconds, and Lawrence pulled out the barrel and took out a handkerchief with disgust to wipe the saliva on the barrel. The man's mouth had been burned with dense blisters, and he couldn't even speak properly. It would be difficult to recover without recuperation for a few months. Go away. Lawrence looked at the bully with disdain and spat out 2 words. The strong man who was granted amnesty quickly stood up, squeezed through the crowd, and quickly disappeared at the corner of the street. My compatriots. As you can see. Lawrence looked around at the onlookers, put his pistol back on his waist, raised his hands and announced loudly, all Corsicans are born equal. I will never allow oppression and bullying of Corsicans to happen in front of me. If there is, I will use the power given to me by my compatriots to punish it. The crowd was silent for a moment, and then burst into loud cheers. People excitedly repeated what Lawrence said, all people are born equal. Lawrence waved to the crowd for a moment, and under the attention and cheers of the people, he pulled Anna out of the crowded crowd. Sir, are all the things you said just now true? After getting away from the crowd, Anna hesitated and pulled the corner of Lawrence's clothes and asked carefully, about what? Lawrence responded casually, about people and equality. Anna said timidly, but I don't think I'm equal to others. Sometimes I see the houses where people live in Ancheng district from a distance. They are so bright, so spacious, and so beautiful. Occasionally I can see them going out, and the clothes they wear are styles that I can't even imagine. Even if they go to a place 3 miles away, they have to hire a luxurious 4-horse carriage. I never dare to think that I'm equal to those people. After hearing this, Lawrence stopped and said softly, Anna, yes, sir. Anna lowered her head and carefully looked at Lawrence with her peripheral vision. There is indeed no absolute equality in this world. The superiors call this inequality fate and force us to accept it. But one day, people will understand that this is wrong. People will resist, fight, and erase the injustice imposed on them. Maybe they will not succeed, and even their sons and grandsons will not succeed, but as long as people continue to go through fire and water for this, equality for all mankind will be achieved one day in the future. Can we see that day? Anna raised her head and looked at Lawrence. We may not see the day of success, but the day when the struggle begins may not be far away. Lawrence said, looking at the other side of the sea, in the direction of Paris. Chapter 12 Residence. After finally getting rid of the enthusiastic crowd, Lawrence, under the guidance of Anna, turned into a cafe, where Anna arranged for Lawrence to meet with a house lessor. The cafe was not big, with only a dozen tables, but the scenery was great, and the coast of Ajaccio could be seen from the window. There was also a small round stage in the hall, with a severely damaged and inaccurate piano placed on it. A third-rate performer dressed in a serious manner kept playing light and cheerful songs. Despite this was already the best cafe in the whole of Ajaccio. According to convention, guests like Anna, who were as dirty as a coal ball, would definitely not be allowed in, but the store manager quickly recognized that the girl was next to the famous Napoleon Bonaparte, so he allowed them in. He personally led them to a table by the window and sat them down. Anna greedily sucked the faint aroma of coffee beans mixed with oak in the store. It was a kind of enjoyment for Anna not to smell the unbearable stench of the stinking ditch. Since Lawrence was more than 3 hours late, the taxi driver had already left. Lawrence had to give a waiter a silver coin tip and asked him to go to the address Anna gave to invite the other party back. What do you want to order? Lawrence looked through the menu boredly and asked Anna casually. Anna secretly glanced at the menu. She was not very literate, and the menu used several languages, which made Anna even more confused. Lawrence inherited the common sense of this body, and was very proficient in French, Italian and High German. No, sir, Anna was waving her hand and said, but her stomach suddenly grumbled, and the sound was so loud that the guests at the next table couldn't help but look at her sideways. I'm sorry, sir, I clearly ate 2 baked potatoes this morning. The girl blushed and apologized with her head down. Lawrence smiled, waved, and called the waiter, asked for a 4-inch cream cake and a plate of dark chocolate for Anna, and ordered a cup of coffee for himself, choosing coffee beans from Mocha. Mocha was originally a famous coffee trading city on the Red Sea coast, and later became the name of a type of coffee. Although the scenery outside the window was pleasant, I felt bored after looking at it for a while. While waiting for the renter, Lawrence began to look at the girl next to him. Anna's excellent ability to read people's minds and her well-informed information left a deep impression on Lawrence, especially because she lived in Zicheng district. Not only was it poor and backward, but the various forces were also intertwined and complicated. Whether it was planning to get involved in Zicheng district in the future, or dealing with the retaliation of the dock workers union at present, Lawrence estimated that Anna's assistance was indispensable. If there is a chance, you can even let her serve as a diplomat or a spy. With her talent, as long as she is trained a little, she will be able to do it. Lawrence took a sip of the coffee cup, but his eyes were fixed on Anna, fantasizing about her future. Anna, who was burying her head in the cake and devouring it, also keenly noticed Lawrence's gaze, and her cheeks flushed immediately. She had the misunderstanding that a 16-year-old girl often had, and even stopped her mouth. "What's wrong, Anna? The cake doesn't suit your taste?" Lawrence asked casually when he saw Anna suddenly stop. Anna patted her face and shook her head, throwing away the thought just now. The difference in status between the two parties was so great that Anna dared not even keep the slightest thought of usurping. "No, sir, I have never eaten such delicious food." At this moment, the taxi driver finally arrived and was led by the waiter to Lawrence's table to sit down. The visitor was an old lady in simple clothes, wearing a light green dress without any patterns, no hat, and her hair was simply tied with a ribbon. Although there were many wrinkles on her face, she was very energetic. Lawrence quickly stood up, bent down slightly, and apologized. "I'm very sorry to have you come again." The old lady smiled and waved her hand, indicating that it was okay, and said, "You are Mr. Lawrence Bonaparte. You are busy with official duties. I understand. Just call me Mrs. Dulac. I'm a tailor." Lawrence glanced at Mrs. Dulac's fingers, although there were some wrinkles, but they looked slender and flexible. After a round of greetings, the two sides sat down. Lawrence took the initiative to order a glass of sterilized milk for her, and then began to discuss the rental of the house. "I have heard your requirements from this girl. My son's house can fully meet your requirements." Mrs. Dulac kept smiling and said, "He is a businessman and will be going abroad for a long time. This house is idle." Lawrence nodded and looked at Anna with some admiration. His requirements for the house were not low. In fact, he only gave Anna half a day. Unexpectedly, Anna could find and contact a lessor who met the requirements in such a short time. However, I really didn't expect that the person who rented this house would be the famous Mr. Lawrence Bonaparte, Mrs. Dulac said with a smile. Lawrence touched his nose modestly. The scene he made in the morning was indeed too big. In just half a day, at least the citizens in the North and South districts knew his name and his conspicuous uniform. Lawrence took a sip of coffee and said, "Then, as for the rent, since it's Mr. Bonaparte, 30 gold a month will be fine." Mrs. Dulac responded. Lawrence couldn't help but smile. It seems that his fame still has some effect. Otherwise, according to his estimation, a house that meets the requirements will have monthly rent of at least 40 gold. Anna stuffed chocolate into her mouth and listened to the conversation of the two with envy. Whether it was 30 gold or 40 gold, it was a number that Anna dared not imagine. For her, the monthly expenses would not exceed 3 gold coins. After basically reaching an agreement, the two sides sat and chatted for a while. Lawrence also learned that Mrs. Dulac ran a clothing store, which was located next to the rented house. A perfect version in 16:9 book bar. Due to Mrs. Durac's superb craftsmanship, many wealthy businessmen and congressmen made a special trip to the North City district to ask her to customize clothes. Even Lawrence's brother Carlo had customized a shirt and trousers here. After some small talk, Mrs. Dulac took out a silver pocket watch, checked the time, and invited Lawrence to see the house. The three of them stood up, and Lawrence left 3 gold coins on the table to pay the bill, and the extra part was used as a tip for the waiter. After a short walk, the three of them stopped at a street corner. In front of them was a 3-story apartment, and next to it was Mrs. Dulac's clothing store. The apartment was well equipped. The first floor was a living room, dining room, kitchen and study. The second floor had 4 bedrooms, a small balcony and a bathroom. The third floor was an attic used as a storage room, and there was also a large basement. Most of the furniture was half new and half old, which was the most comfortable time to use. Lawrence was very satisfied. He signed a contract with Mrs. Dollar in her store, paid the first month's rent, and got the key. Hanging the bronze key on his belt, Lawrence breathed a sigh of relief. No matter in which era, having your own residence is the most comfortable thing. Lawrence didn't want to live in the dormitory and squeeze with those patrolmen every day. By the way, Anna. Lawrence suddenly said to Anna behind him, "Are you willing to work for me?" Anna was waiting for this sentence. She couldn't help but get excited, and her eyes lit up, but soon dimmed again. She lowered her head and said, "Of course, sir. It's just, what can someone like me do?" Lawrence touched his head, pointed to the house in front of him, and said, "This is quite big. Why don't you be the housekeeper?" "Housekeeper? But I heard that housekeepers have to be very smart, read, and keep accounts." Anna shook her head repeatedly. "No way. You just need to do some simple housework." Anna opened her mouth. It seems that she is still worried about her lack of ability, but she is afraid that this opportunity will slip away. So after hesitating for a moment, she mustered up the courage to say, "In that case, please let me start as your maid." Chapter 13 Revenge. A whole week had passed since Lawrence moved into his apartment in the North City. This was also a rare leisure day for him after his time travel. Every morning, Lawrence changed into his uniform on time, waved to the citizens who respected him on the street, and then walked to the patrol station to supervise the work. With the influence of the last public execution, coupled with Lawrence's personal supervision every day in the past few days, the style of the patrol has indeed improved a lot. This has also made more and more citizens start to talk about Napoleon Bonaparte, the rising star, behind his back. However, as the saying goes, carrots and sticks, kindness, and force. Lawrence also understands that now his prestige is established, but if he wants to really win the hearts of the patrolmen, he has to find opportunities to show his favor. At home, Anna, the smart and hard-working girl, also keeps everything in the house in order. Although Lawrence does not really regard her as a servant, he has to admit that Anna makes him worry less. After the dirty girl was thoroughly washed, Lawrence found that Anna was impeccable beautiful, with regular facial features, a slender figure, and especially a pair of breathtaking blue eyes, which sometimes made Lawrence stare blankly. Mrs. Dollar was very happy to see her, calling her the little princess of Austria. She generously gave Anna several sets of clothes, and invited her to have tea and chat in the store every afternoon. In the evening of this day, Lawrence finished a day's work and returned home. Anna had prepared dinner, a simple beef stew with potatoes and 2 pieces of soft wheat bread and jam. "Sir, you are back." Anna stood up from the table happily, and greeted him with a smile. Lawrence nodded, whistled, took off his uniform, and sat at the dining table in his shirt. Anna's personality has become more cheerful during these days of living together. Every day, she tells Lawrence a lot of interesting things she heard from Mrs. Dollar. "Sir, Mrs. Dollar gave me this." Anna stood up and lifted her long skirt a little, revealing her slender calves, which were wrapped in a layer of smooth white silk fabric. "Mrs. Dollar said this is called silk stockings. Young ladies all wear this. She said you might like it." Ahem. Eat. Lawrence took a look and quickly coughed twice to change the subject. Anna chuckled twice and spread jam on Lawrence's bread. "By the way, sir," Anna suddenly said halfway through dinner, "I have a small request." "What is it?" Lawrence asked, swallowing a piece of stewed beef. Anna said carefully, "I want to go back home. My parents don't know that I work here. They will be very worried." "Your home? Zichen district? Okay, I'll go with you tomorrow morning." Lawrence hesitated for a moment, but still nodded and agreed. He also wanted to take this opportunity to find out some information about the West City district, especially about the intelligence of the Dock Workers Union. Governor Paula's serious reminder made Lawrence very worried about possible retaliation. Instead of worrying about the enemy's attack every day, it is better to take the initiative to find out the opponent's strengths and weaknesses. "Thank you, sir." Anna happily forked a piece of potato into her mouth with a bright smile. The next morning, Lawrence and Anna got up early and began to wash and dress. Considering that the West City district might be full of Union spies, Lawrence did not wear a patrol uniform, but a grey coat. However, Lawrence still brought a dagger and a pistol, hidden under the coat to prevent possible conflicts. As for Anna, he picked a pure black robe with a hood for her to cover her face. After all, Anna is no longer the little coal ball covered with dirt. Even Mrs. Terra, who has come into contact with countless ladies, likes her very much. Before leaving, Lawrence went to the patrol station and explained some things to Old Scene. After all, we were heading to the West City district, so we still needed to keep some backup plans. There were no strict boundaries between the various districts of Ajaccio, but for the West City district, as long as your nose began to be flooded with a pungent stench, you were already standing in this poor and unsafe place. Oh my god, Anna, did you grow up in a place like this? Lawrence covered his nose and stood there for a long time before recovering from the dizziness. This smell reminded Lawrence of the smell of ammonia in the university laboratory in his previous life. In fact, the air here does contain a small amount of ammonia because the poor people here have almost no toilets in their homes, and they basically urinate and defecate outdoors. The ammonia in the urine evaporates and mixes with various sodas to form this stench. There are also few high-rise buildings in the West City district. There are sheds built with wooden pillars and iron sheets everywhere. Most of the pedestrians are wearing tattered linen clothes, and there are even a few who are naked. I'm sorry, sir. In fact, it's not so uncomfortable after getting used to it, Anna said apologetically. The slums were not divided into streets like other urban areas. Since these simple shacks were easy to collapse and build, the residences of each poor person were often changed. This made Anna wander around for a long time without finding her own shack. As the two continued to look for it, Anna suddenly turned her head slightly backwards, glanced sideways, and then quietly tugged at the corner of Lawrence's clothes and quickened her pace. Lawrence also understood and followed Anna into a hidden alley. Anna leaned on Lawrence, leaned into his ear, and whispered, "Someone is following us, sir. Did you notice it? Do you know who it is?" Lawrence was a little surprised. He himself did not realize that he was being followed. Anna said calmly, "Just behind us on the right, there was a burly man. There were tattoos on his arms and a knife on his waist. He should be a gang member." Lawrence frowned slightly. Considering the close relationship between the gang and the dock workers union, this stalker might have bad intentions. "Are you sure he's following us?" Lawrence carefully pulled out his flintlock pistol and began to load lead bullets and gunpowder. "That's right," Anna nodded and said, "I noticed it 10 minutes ago. He made a few detours and has been behind us." Lawrence nodded and couldn't help but sigh that recruiting Anna was indeed the right choice. Such intuitive instincts can only be trained in such a harsh environment. Lawrence made a shushing gesture to Anna, then hid behind the wall, quietly waiting for the stalker to catch up. Snap, snap, snap. The footsteps were getting closer and closer. Lawrence counted 3 numbers in his mind and jumped out from behind the wall. The stalker obviously didn't expect Lawrence to find him, and he didn't react for a while. Lawrence swung his pistol and hit the man's forehead hard. The bronze gun handle hit his forehead heavily, and the burly man suddenly saw stars. Lawrence was quick and immediately punched him in the abdomen, and then dragged the man who was limp on the ground into the alley. "Tell me, who told you to come?" Lawrence put the muzzle of the gun against the man's head and asked coldly. The man saw that he was seen through by Lawrence, so he simply tore off his disguise and said with a grin, "Lawrence Bonaparte, I didn't expect you to dare to step into Zachin district after killing the Union people. Let me tell you, our people are on the way. You can't escape. If you let me go, I can still plead for you. TSK, it's really the Union." Lawrence smacked his lips. He didn't expect that the Union's eyes were so dense that he was recognized as soon as he arrived in Zachin district. "Anna, close your eyes," Lawrence said lightly. "Okay, sir." Anna closed her eyes obediently. Bang! The loud gunshot echoed in the alley. The man's bloody face still showed that he was unwilling to die. Unexpectedly, Lawrence chose to shoot without any nonsense. Gently blowing away the gunpowder smoke from the muzzle, Lawrence grabbed Anna's little hand and left quickly. The Union people were already on the way, and it was not suitable to stay here for long. Chapter 14 Ambush. "Sir, I'm familiar with this area. I'll lead the way." Anna quickened her pace and walked in front of Lawrence, ready to take the fastest route to leave the West City. But Lawrence shook his head gently and said, "No, let's go to the open space in the southwest corner." "That open space? But that's a dead end. There's no way to go after you get there." Anna looked at Lawrence in confusion, but Lawrence nodded firmly and stubbornly. Out of trust in Lawrence, Anna gritted her teeth and led Lawrence to the southwest open space at a fast pace. The two walked and ran for a while and finally came to the open space in the southwest corner. This is an open area cut out from the dense jungle. There is only one road back and forth, and it is surrounded by half-meter high weeds and shrubs. "Sir, there is no road here anymore," Anna said worriedly. Before Anna finished speaking, she heard a burst of arrogant laughter. "Ha ha ha, this little girl is right. Lawrence Bonaparte." More than 10 strong men with bare upper bodies were chasing on the road behind them, all with broad-bladed machetes tied around their waists and a green tattoo on their arms. The tattoo was a hideous sea snake wrapped around 2 machetes. Anna knew that this was the symbol of the Sea Snake Gang, which was famous for its ferocity and brutality on the dock. The leader was the most muscular, with muscular muscles all over his body that made people shudder. The only flaw was the black eye patch on his left eye, which was a disability left by a fight with someone in his early years. It was he who laughed just now. Anna's pupils shrank, and she took a step back in fear. She grabbed Lawrence's arm and said, "Sir, these are people from the Sea Snake Gang. Leading them is their leader, whom we all call One Eye." Lawrence looked at him calmly and said, "It's a good name, as the name suggests." One Eye drew the machete from his waist, played with the knife in his hand, and shouted in a hoarse voice, "Oh, Captain Bonaparte also wants a name like this? Let me help you choose. Do you want to become one-legged? Or one-armed? Or..." One Eye glanced at Lawrence's crotch obscenely and laughed. "Or do you want to become an old man with only one egg? Ha 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 ha. Boss, why waste time talking to him? Just chop him into a human stick and throw him into the sea." A subordinate came up and said with a lewd smile, "The girl next to him is pretty good." One Eye stared at Anna, licked his tongue, smiled obscenely and said, "Damn, I wouldn't have noticed it if you hadn't told me. As usual, I'll come first when the time comes." Anna shrank behind Lawrence in fear, her body trembling slightly. Lawrence held Anna's shaking hand with his left hand and pulled out the pistol from his waist with his right hand. "Humph, I have more than a dozen brothers here. What can your little broken gun do?" One Eye looked at Lawrence with disdain as he drew his gun, without a trace of nervousness. "Did I kill all your people that day?" Lawrence suddenly asked. "No, they are from different gangs, but my brother is one of them." Mentioning the prisoners shot by Lawrence, One Eye restrained his grim smile and his eyes became cold. Lawrence frowned slightly and muttered to himself, "It seems that, after dealing with these people today, it will take a while." One Eye chuckled, pointed at his men, and shouted arrogantly, "Deal with me? Lawrence Bonaparte. Open your eyes and see how many fucking people I have. Really? Open your eyes and see how many people I have." As soon as the voice fell, Lawrence pointed the muzzle of the gun to the sky and pulled the trigger. As the gunshots rang out, the jungle, which was silent just now, suddenly began to make rustling sounds. Then 20 figures jumped out of the woods and stood behind Lawrence. The pupils of the one-eyed man shrank. These 20 people were all wearing patrol uniforms, holding muskets in their hands, aiming at the one-eyed man and his group, waiting for the order to fire. "Lord Bonaparte, we have prepared according to your instructions this morning." Old Scene walked to Lawrence and saluted. Lawrence glanced at the patrol soldiers and said with a little dissatisfaction, "Why are there only 20 people? These are all the muskets in the team." Old Scene smiled bitterly. The one-eyed man on the opposite side also made a prompt decision and shouted immediately, "Damn it, there is an ambush, run." The one-eyed man understood that, although the number of people on both sides was almost the same, and even the combat quality of the one-eyed man was much higher than that of these patrol soldiers who were betraying their own people, in such a small-scale battle, hot weapons against cold weapons would be a one-sided massacre. Lawrence immediately shouted in a low voice, "Everyone, fire freely, regardless of life or death." A puff of white smoke floated up, accompanied by the explosion of gunpowder and the screams of the enemy. These 19mm caliber smoothbore rifles can easily make a small hole in the human body at such a close distance. One Eye is indeed a man who fought his way out of a sea of blood and corpses. He ran more than 10 meters in just a few seconds, but was still hit in the calf by a stray bullet, and fell to the ground wailing. Looking at the remaining 4 or 5 enemies who survived the first round of shooting, Lawrence continued to order without mercy. Everyone put on bayonets, chase after them, and don't let any of them escape. The patrolmen attached bayonets to the barrels of the guns a little unfamiliarly. After all, they had not used these muskets for many years, and then quickly chased after them. Lawrence, Anna and Old Scene walked slowly to the side of the injured One Eye. Old Scene looked at the muscular man lying on the ground and yelling. He couldn't help but step back in fear, spitting and saying, "It's really One Eye. This man is also famous in Ajaccio, and is famous for his brutality." After that, Old Scene didn't forget to flatter him and said, "Of course he is not as famous as you, Lord Bonaparte." Ignoring Old Scene's flattering remarks, Lawrence took 2 steps forward and looked at One Eye's injuries. There were 2 gunshot wounds on his right leg, and the wounds were still bleeding. Fortunately, One Eye's physical fitness was strong, and the bullet did not penetrate, so the amount of bleeding was not large. If he was treated in time, he would not be in danger of life. What does he do to make money? Lawrence suddenly asked Old Scene. Smuggling slaves, kidnapping and extortion, murder and arson, everything. Old Scene glanced at One Eye and answered. A perfect version at 16 to 9 book bar. When the desperate One Eye heard Lawrence's words, his eyes suddenly flashed with brilliance, and he quickly said, "You want money? I have it. I have a lot." Lawrence pulled out his dagger, squatted down, put the knife on One Eye's neck, and asked, "Where is it?" "In my gang's warehouse. I can take you there." Even a tough guy like One Eye couldn't help but tremble after the knife was put on his neck. Lawrence snorted coldly and slapped One Eye's face with his left hand. "Do you think I'm a fool? Who knows how many of your people are over there?" One Eye only brought a dozen elites to chase Lawrence this time, but the entire gang is estimated to have more than 100 people. If they really fight with Lawrence's 20 patrolmen, it's hard to say who will win. "People like you have a gold cave. I want that." Lawrence made a cold request, and at the same time, pressed the dagger harder, piercing a shallow blood mark on One Eye's neck. "You." One Eye's eyes widened in anger. For every person like him who lives on the tip of a knife, this private vault is their last trump card. When they can't lift the knife, they rely on this money to live. Lawrence didn't say anything, and continued to increase the strength of his hand. The blade had sunk half a centimeter below the skin, and a trickle of blood began to flow out from under the blade. One Eye couldn't stand this torture anymore, and shouted at the top of his voice, okay, I'll give you money, you spare my life. Okay. Lawrence nodded and agreed, loosening his hand on the knife. One Eye took a deep breath. This was the wealth he had accumulated over the years, but he didn't expect that all of it would be lost today. In the South City, Independence Street, there is an abandoned grey hut. There is a hollow floor inside, and there is a box underneath. "How much is it?" Lawrence asked. "Almost 2,000 gold." 2,000 gold? Old Scene on the side couldn't help but take a breath of cold air. This was just the secret property. The real estate and cash on the surface were estimated to be several times this. Lawrence nodded, put the dagger back into his waist, and signaled Anna to remember this address. At this time, the patrolmen who had just gone to chase the gang also escorted the escaped gang members back. Lawrence took a look at them. Except for some scratches on their bodies, the rest were safe and sound, and it seemed that they had not encountered fierce resistance. "Leave the bodies here to feed the wolves, and tie up all the living ones, and take them back to the dungeon." Lawrence ordered loudly, and kicked the one-eyed man on the ground with his foot, adding, "The same goes for this one." "Wait. You just said you would spare me." The one-eyed man widened his eyes, covered his bleeding neck, and roared in a low voice, "Don't bark here." Lawrence kicked the one-eyed man in the lower abdomen mercilessly. "I only said I would spare your life, but I didn't say I would let you go. You." The one-eyed man couldn't help but be furious after hearing this, and coupled with excessive blood loss, he fainted directly. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 15 Chief CLUO. On the coastline of the West City, a short distance north of the bustling port, there is an undeveloped golden beach. About 200 meters away from the beach is a small church, a typical French Gothic building, with towering spires and flying buttresses that are already mottled, obviously weathered. Despite the bright beach and the ancient church, even a fool would not come to this beach to enjoy the mountains and water. Because everyone in Ajaccio knows that this is the headquarters of the Dock Workers Union. When Paulie established the Republic of Corsica, the country was in a state of disrepair and the finances were in deficit. There was no money to repair this dilapidated church. It happened that the union was asking for a property to be used as the headquarters, so Paulie simply allocated this area to them. I saw that the priest's room in the union headquarters, which is now the room of the union chief, was pushed open in a panic. "What's the matter?" A middle-aged man with a full beard sat in the room. The light inside was dim and his appearance could not be seen clearly. He remained calm when faced with the panicked subordinate who rushed in and just asked calmly. The subordinate was panting heavily, as if he had run all the way here. He calmed down for a few seconds before speaking. Boss, something happened." The man did not speak, but reached out and took out a cigar box from under the table. The box was printed with the words "Made in La Plata." This was a high-end product from America. He skillfully cut off the cigar head, then lit a match, and took a deep breath with his eyes closed. His expression was very intoxicated, and then he said, "What did I say to you last time?" "The last time?" The subordinate was stunned, and obviously could not remember. "Here, you have to call me Chief CLUO." The man's voice sank, and the veins on his forehead bulged as if he had changed his face. He held the lead cigar in his right hand, and poked it directly into the subordinate's face. "Ah, yes, Chief CLUO." The subordinate endured the burning pain on his face, but did not dare to dodge. Everyone knew what the end would be for those who went against CLUO's wishes. "Tell me, what's the matter?" Silla asked nonchalantly, putting the cigar in his mouth and playing with the silver cigar pick in his hand. "That Napoleon Bonaparte showed up in the West City district. One Eye led people to hunt him down, but no one came back. Some people said they saw patrolmen taking One Eye back tied up." Bonaparte Ciro stopped playing with his hands, gently put down the cigar pick, and seemed to be talking to himself. "That Carlo's brother, the one who executed our people last time." The informant in the governor's palace also said that he seemed to be very close to Paulie. The subordinate touched his burned face and said carefully, "Old Mr. Ciro, this Bonaparte is simply slapping us in the face. Do you want me to lead people? Idiot." Ciro cursed mercilessly. "Do you know why Paulie regards the union as a thorn in his side, but has never taken action against us?" The subordinate hesitated for a while and said cautiously, "Because we have many people and Paulie dares not." "Stupid ass. Paulie holds the military power firmly in his hands. If he wants, he can send troops to raise this church at any time." CLUO seemed to be intolerant of stupid people. He almost poked the cigar in anger. After taking a few puffs of the cigar, he calmed down a little and continued, "The real reason is, we exist like bacteria. Paulie has 1,000 ways to wipe us out, but other bacteria will soon fill our vacancies. Do you understand? For Paulie, no matter which batch of bacteria is here, it is the same to him. As long as we don't openly oppose him, he will acquiesce to our little tricks in the port." Yes, the subordinate nodded repeatedly, although he didn't know what this thing called bacteria that was discovered only 100 years ago was. But he still understood what CLUO meant. That is, Lawrence is Paula's confidant. If CLUO sent someone to kill him, it would be a slap in Paula's face in public, and the consequences of that would not be borne by anyone in the union. But, One Eye is also a well-known person in the union. Now that he has been kidnapped by Lawrence, isn't that a slap in our face? If we don't retaliate, the subordinate still said unwillingly. "Humph." CLUO chuckled disdainfully and said coldly, "I won't let my knife get bloody. Lawrence Bonaparte, don't think I'm a simple-minded fool like One Eye." At the same time, in the dungeon of the patrol station, One Eye regained consciousness from coma, but his head was still extremely dizzy. Before he opened his eyes, he felt his face was wet. At this time, Lawrence's voice came to his ears. "Old scene, why hasn't he woken up yet? Pour another basin." A basin of freezing cold water was poured directly on the naked upper body of One Eye on the ground. Even with his physical fitness, he couldn't help but tremble all over and suddenly opened his eyes. In front of him was a dim cell, with only a few torches in the corridor providing a pale yellow light source, and in front of him stood the person One Eye least wanted to see, Napoleon Bonaparte, and Old Scene and Anna behind him. One Eye sat up against the wall, shivering uncontrollably. Lawrence ordered people to simply stop the bleeding and bandage the wound on his leg. As for the bullet, stuck in the muscle, Lawrence would not be so kind as to hire a well-trained surgeon for him. "What else do you want? I've given you the money, and I'm here too." The one-eyed man growled in hatred, but his voice was much weaker. Lawrence squatted down, stared straight into the one-eyed man's eyes, and said, "I'll ask you some questions. I hope you will cooperate well, otherwise." Lawrence pointed upwards and threatened, "I believe that there must be someone among my men who is proficient in torture and abuse. Of course, I will abide by the agreement with you and keep you alive. You ask." The one-eyed man lowered his head, no longer intending to resist. Although he himself enjoyed torturing the living, it did not mean that he could calm down in front of those torture instruments. "What kind of organization is the Dock Workers Union?" Lawrence said. He must find out the truth about his current major concern. "Union, huh?" One Eye grinned, laughed miserably, and said, "It's just a dozen dock gang leaders like me who get together to commit murder and arson. However, there is one person who is an exception." At this point, One Eye's expression suddenly became serious, as if the mention of this person's name would make him alert. "His name is Zero. He is the chief of the union and the founder of the union." "Zero?" Lawrence frowned slightly. He had never heard of this name, and then asked, "How is he an exception?" "This man is a venomous snake, an elusive shadow. His gang has the fewest people, but is the most terrifying. Those who oppose Zero will die inexplicably in various accidents. Ordinary people will regard this as a coincidence, but those of us who know a little bit of the inside story understand that Zero is manipulating everything behind the scenes." Even when Zero's name was mentioned in prison, there was a hint of fear in One Eye's words. "He doesn't share the jobs and benefits of the dock with us. On the contrary, he will take the initiative to maintain the order of the dock. He said that he wants to make the trade go smoothly." "I really don't understand." Lawrence was silent for a moment. If it was true as the one-eyed man said, then Zluo's mind was quite sharp. All the revenges against the enemy were carried out in secret, hiding himself behind the scenes without leaving any handle. At the same time, he took the initiative to maintain the order and stability of the port. This may make Governor Paulie rely on him a little. It's no wonder that Paulie thinks that the trade union is a difficult existence. If it is an organization that only burns, kills, robs, and destroys order, Paulie can send troops to destroy it. But now the trade union, Paulie wants to take action against it. I'm afraid he has to consider the pros and cons. Lawrence stood up and rubbed his dizzy head. Even he had to admit that he had encountered a tough bone this time. Chapter 16, Winning Over the People. Walking out of the cell where the one-eyed man was imprisoned, Lawrence shook his head and put aside the matter about Zero. He could not think of a way to deal with Zero for a while, and if Zero wanted to retaliate against someone as prominent as himself, given his style of doing things, he would have to make careful plans for a period of time. The conflict between the two sides would not break out in a short period of time, and Lawrence could do nothing about Zero hiding in the dark, so he had to patiently look for a turning point. At that time, if he was really desperate, Lawrence could shamelessly ask Governor Paul for help. Now was a critical moment for the survival of Corsica, and Paul would not watch Lawrence, the core figure of the plan, die. But in this case, Paul, a shrewd political veteran, would inevitably put forward corresponding conditions, and at that time, the price to be paid would not be decided by Lawrence. Lawrence really didn't like the feeling of handing his fate over to others. Lawrence walked into the lobby of the garrison and saw that there were especially many patrolmen in the hall today. Almost half of the patrolmen were there, standing in a circle to watch something, and people were amazed from time to time. Seeing Lawrence coming up, the patrolmen quickly stepped aside to make way for Lawrence. What everyone was watching was a heavy oak box, which was open. The most eye-catching thing was the gold coins piled up like a small mountain in the box. Lawrence nodded. This was what he had just ordered. The gold coins taken from the place mentioned by the one-eyed man were estimated to be not much different from the 2,000 coins mentioned by the one-eyed man. Just grabbing a handful from it would be enough for an ordinary patrolman's annual salary. No wonder they all came to have a look. But they also understood that this huge sum of money belonged to Lawrence alone, and it was already quite rare to be able to put it in the middle for them to look at. Lawrence looked around. All the patrolmen were still staring at the wooden box. Even a young soldier who looked only 16 or 17 years old didn't notice that his saliva was dripping down his collar. At this time, Old Scene also came up from the dungeon. Seeing that everyone was still watching, he hurriedly stepped forward and flattered Lawrence. "What are you all looking at here? This is the legal property of Lord Bonaparte. Let's go." Old Scene's prestige in the team was not low. After hearing this, everyone reluctantly took a last look at the pile of gold coins and prepared to disperse. "Wait." Lawrence suddenly raised his voice and stopped everyone who was about to leave. Old Scene was even more confused. There were 2,000 gold coins here, enough to make the poorest people at the bottom become decent middle-class gentlemen. What exactly did Captain Bonaparte want to do? "Brothers, who do you think this money belongs to?" Lawrence asked loudly. The patrolmen stood there in a daze, not knowing what Lawrence was doing. Was he testing their loyalty? So they replied in a sparse voice, "Of course it's Lord Bonaparte. Yes, it's the Lord's property." Lawrence stood there patiently, urging everyone to give their answers with his eyes. Of course, everyone's answer was the same without exception. "Lord Bonaparte. You are wrong, my brothers." Lawrence shouted in a stern and passionate voice, then walked slowly to the crowd and said loudly, "We are the great Corsican guards, the guardians of countless people, and the closest brothers to each other. How can brothers not share their wealth? How can brothers not share honor and disgrace? Even if all of you vote and say that I should accept this windfall alone, I cannot take it against my conscience." Old Scene couldn't help but widen his eyes after hearing this. He didn't care about the polite words Lawrence said, but the meaning behind these words seemed to be that he wanted to distribute the money to everyone. 2,000 gold coins. If I had this much money, I would quit my job and retire in Pisa, ordering 3 dancers to accompany me every day. Old Scene couldn't help swallowing his saliva and couldn't believe that Lawrence would share this huge sum of money with everyone. Of course, in order to prevent the devil called greed from affecting the friendship of brothers, I will use my power as a leader to deal with this property. Lawrence said immediately. Of course he would not directly divide this huge sum of money equally among everyone. "Therefore, I declare that everyone's share will be added to your salary and will continue to be paid out. As long as I'm still your leader, this money will continue to be paid out. And as long as I'm still your leader, the wealth we share will increase." The patrolmen were stunned in place, thinking rapidly. 2,000 gold coins were divided among 50 people, and each person could get a full 40 gold coins. Although it didn't seem like a lot, Lawrence's words seemed to imply that there would be more wealth to be shared with them. Of course, all this was based on the premise that Lawrence was still their leader. Old Scene was indeed a smart man. He understood Lawrence's intention immediately. As long as the money was still being distributed, Lawrence would have an irreplaceable position in the team. This was a naked attempt to win over people's hearts, but no one would refuse such a direct win over. I don't know who took the lead and shouted, "Glory to Bonaparte." Soon, the soldiers looked at this young and promising officer with gratitude. He not only turned the patrol soldiers from street rats that everyone looked at into heroes who received flowers and cheers, but also brought them the most direct benefits, especially the visual impact of the pile of gold coins in front of them. As long as Lord Bonaparte is leading us, this is our wealth. A correct version of the book in 16:9. Everyone's mind rose to the same idea: follow him. Everyone couldn't help but follow and shout, "Glory to Bonaparte! Glory to Bonaparte!" Lawrence then ordered Old Scene to lock the box, put a seal on it, and move it into the storage room on the 4th floor. The box can only be opened in front of everyone on payday. After giving the order, Lawrence waved to the patrolmen and prepared to go home to enjoy the dinner that Anna had carefully prepared. The excited soldiers followed Lawrence out of the garrison and sang an ancient folk song in unison to praise the Lord's wisdom. until Lawrence returned home. The fanatical soldiers still stood in front of the door and sang the whole folk song before leaving one after another. Anna, who had watched the whole process on the balcony, couldn't help rubbing her puzzled little head and said, "Oh my god, sir, did you invite them to drink? A group of grown men are singing and dancing." Lawrence walked to the balcony with a smile, waved goodbye to the soldiers who were leaving, and said to Anna, "Sometimes, worship is something that can make people more fanatical than alcohol." "Really?" Anna rested her head on her arm, tilted her head to look at Lawrence, and said seriously, "It seems that I don't need to drink in the future." "Huh? Why?" Lawrence was stunned for a moment. Anna smiled mischievously, "Because I admire you very much, sir." Chapter 17 Before the Storm. In the last few days of January, Lawrence had a rare few days of peace. The retaliation of the dock workers union would not come for a while. As long as Lawrence did not risk his life to enter their territory in the West City District, the gang leaders would not be stupid enough to come to the North City District to attack Lawrence. Such an act of openly challenging the laws and order of Corsica would definitely anger a group of dignitaries including Paulie. Lawrence, who was free, went to the patrol team to supervise the work step by step during the day and read quietly in the company of Anna at night. Occasionally, Mrs. Dular would invite Lawrence and Anna to dinner. At the end of the month, on the payday, the patrolmen also received their first share in addition to their wages. Although the amount was not much each month, everyone couldn't help laughing when they saw the gold coins lying in their hands, and they supported Captain Bonaparte more and more. Although Lawrence occasionally hoped to live in peace forever, he understood that the turning point of the fate of the entire Corsica was in the near future, and such a leisurely time would not last long. As expected, on the morning of the last day of January, there was a hasty knock on Lawrence's door. Anna was still sleeping soundly, and Lawrence, who had gotten up early, was sitting in the living room reading a book, a second-rate night novel with mediocre writing skills. Hearing the knock on the door, Lawrence put down the book and stood up. When he opened the door, he saw a man in a dark green coat. There was a badge on his chest with the flag of the Republic of Corsica on it. Lawrence recalled for a while, and remembered that he had seen this man in the governor's mansion. It seemed that he was sent by Paulie. "Come in." Lawrence turned sideways, and extended his hand to greet him. "No need." The man shook his head and said, "I'm the secretary of Governor Paulie. I'm here to inform you that the Corsica Parliament will hold an emergency meeting tomorrow, February 1st. Governor Paulie requires you to attend the meeting as a staff officer." Lawrence nodded solemnly. According to convention, the next regular meeting of the Corsica Parliament should be in early March, but Paulie obviously can't wait. He must decide on a plan for Corsica's survival as soon as possible. "Tell Governor Paulie for me, I understand." Well, the man's expression was also very heavy. As Paulie's secretary, he must also know something about the dangerous situation in Corsica. Paulie's secretary left in a hurry after delivering the message, probably because he had other work. Lawrence, who returned to the living room, also sat on the sofa and fell into deep thought. At present, only his plan is most suitable for the current situation, so Paulie must be on the same front with Lawrence. But Lawrence didn't know what attitude other members with ulterior motives would hold. Whether for Corsica or for his own interests, Lawrence must ensure that this plan is passed. As long as he becomes the person in charge of the plan, the political capital and resources mobilized will be immeasurable. Even so, Lawrence had no suitable solution for the time being. He had to go into the study, unfold the letter paper, and write a letter to his brother, Councillor Carlo, hoping that he would stand with him at that time. With the brotherly relationship between the two, plus the inside story that Carlo knew, he would not refuse. As for how to win over or intimidate other councillors, Lawrence leaned over the table and thought hard for a long time, and finally came to the conclusion, we must start with Paulie. Although Paulie dispersed political power to the councillors in order to win over local forces and maintain order at the beginning of the establishment of the Republic of Corsica. But there is no doubt that if Paulie, who holds the army in his hands, wants to go his own way, no one in Corsica can stop him. At that time, the opinion of the parliament may not be important. "Sir, are you hungry? I'll go prepare breakfast." Anna rubbed her sleepy eyes and walked down from the second floor. She was still wearing a loose silk pajamas and said to Lawrence in the study, Lawrence looked sideways, then quickly moved his eyes away from Anna's large exposed white skin, coughed twice pretending to be calm, and said, "Ahem, don't worry, change your clothes, and help me deliver this letter to Senator Carlo Bonaparte of the East City District." Anna nodded, took the envelope with both hands, turned back to the room, and started to change clothes. Lawrence tilted his head, trying to think about how to persuade Governor Paoli to carry out their plan to the end. The next day, early in the morning, at 7 o'clock. Although the parliament will not officially start until 10 o'clock in the morning, it is also the first time for Lawrence to attend such an important meeting. He chose to rush to get more information earlier. Since he attended the parliament today as a staff officer, Lawrence did not wear the patrol uniform, but chose a set of decent gentleman's suits given by Carlo. The guards of the governor's mansion had also heard of the famous Captain Bonaparte, and only made a simple inspection before allowing Lawrence to enter. When Lawrence walked into the gate, he could still hear the conversation of the guards behind him. "That's Captain Bonaparte. He is really young and promising. How great it would be to work under him. I envy those patrolmen." That's right, hearing such a conversation, Lawrence could only laugh. It seems that the 2,000 gold coins were worth it. Even the soldiers in other positions have spread the news. The Corsica Parliament is set up in the governor's palace. The auditorium next to Paola's residence was also built during the Genoese period. It has a typical post-Renaissance architectural style. The layout of the auditorium has been changed for holding parliaments. There are 6 rows of seats near the gate for citizens who come to listen. According to Corsican law, citizens have the right to listen to the parliament when it is held. However, today, because it is an emergency meeting, it is not open to citizens. Further inside is a long horseshoe-shaped table facing the door. This is the seat for the parliamentarians and participants. The top seat is undoubtedly reserved for Governor Paoli, a perfect version of the book in 1609. At the front is a speaking table, reserved for the speaker who presides over the order and the members who need to make long speeches. When Lawrence entered the auditorium, Governor Paoli was already there. Because his official position is the general of the country, Paoli did not wear a silver wig today, but wore a dark green military uniform with a dazzling gold medal on his chest. Behind the speaking table in front of Paoli was an old man with bright eyes. He wore a low white bishop's hat and a white robe. It seems that this person is the Bishop of Corsica, but from his position, it seems that he also holds the position of speaker. "Lawrence, you are here." Paoli was discussing something with the bishop. His expression was very heavy. Seeing Lawrence coming, he just turned his head slightly to signal him to come and sit down. The status of the two people in front of him was much higher than his own, and Lawrence could not interrupt, so he listened patiently to their discussion. It was heard that the two were arguing about the plan of Paoli and Lawrence. The plan was divided into 2 parts. One was to withdraw troops from the north, to lure the Genoese south, and the other was to spread the word that there were large silver mines on Corsica. Since the latter required a high degree of secrecy and did not require much official cooperation, Paoli did not intend to inform the parliament, but was prepared to carry out it directly with Lawrence. However, for the former, such a large-scale withdrawal could not be concealed or explained to the parliament. Paoli wanted to cancel it from the agenda, but the bishop refused on the grounds that the withdrawal was related to the interests of the people in the constituency, and asked to submit it to the parliament for discussion. The two argued until their faces were red, but the bishop never gave in. Paoli could not do anything about this representative of the church power for the time being. In addition, he was indeed at fault in this matter. If it was exposed, public opinion would be quite unfavorable to Paoli. Paoli had to compromise and agreed to add the withdrawal to the agenda and prepare to find a solution during the meeting. Lawrence, who had been listening on the side, gradually became clear in his eyes. As long as he confirmed that Paoli's idea of withdrawing troops was firm enough, everything would be easy. Lawrence had countless ways to bypass the parliament and mobilize the army, and deliberately letting the parliament veto the withdrawal of troops might be more beneficial to me. Lawrence narrowed his eyes and couldn't help licking his upper lip, thinking so. Chapter 18 Parliament. At about 9:30 in the morning, the councillors and the participants had basically arrived. Carlo also dressed up carefully to attend the meeting. When he entered the door, he waved to Lawrence, who was sitting next to Paoli, indicating that his letter had been received. There are a total of 9 councillors in Corsica, all of whom are representatives from their respective cities. However, since the population of Ajaccio accounts for half of the entire Corsica, each of the 4 districts of Ajaccio will produce a councillor. Before the meeting started, Lawrence also took the opportunity to look at this group that can influence the fate of Corsica. From the content of their casual conversation, those councillors from areas outside Ajaccio, except Carlo, are all wealthy local farmers. This is not surprising. The population of those cities is often only a few thousand people. In Lawrence's eyes, they can only be regarded as larger villages. The representatives elected are naturally these farmers. And 3 councillors in Ajaccio are wealthy businessmen or dignitaries who live in the eastern city and have their own industries. There is no doubt that they all exerted their influence during the election. Only the councillor from Zichan district was very different. He had a stubble beard and seemed to have not been groomed for a long time. The brown coat on his body had been washed and turned white, which was out of tune with the councillors, who were dressed in their best clothes. Especially in a place like the Parliament, he took out his cigar box and started smoking, completely ignoring the actions of the people around him who covered their faces and looked at him sideways. However, for some reason, Lawrence still smelled a dangerous smell from him, like a poisonous snake in the gutter. I really don't know how a place like Zichan district elects councillors. Lawrence supported his head and thought about it, waiting for the Parliament to start. Of course, while observing others, Lawrence also became a small focus in the venue. This young man who became famous in Ajaccio did a lot of things that amazed them, especially the recent distribution of the one-eyed property to his subordinates, which made many smart people vaguely see Lawrence's ambition. After all, spending money to buy people's hearts will be rewarded. What shocked many attendees was that Lawrence's seat today was right next to Paulie, which was the most eye-catching position in the whole venue. Many people present regarded Lawrence as Paulie's right-hand man and put his name on the list of people not to be provoked. By the way, I heard that you did another big thing in the patrol team. Paulie also heard people's whispers and took the opportunity to say. Lawrence coughed twice and said, "It's not a big deal. I just happened to get a sum of money and gave it out to boost morale." Paulie sat in his seat, rolled his eyes, and glanced at Lawrence, with 3 points of appreciation and 7 points of fear in his eyes, and said, 2,000 gold coins is not a small amount. Paulie can be said to love and hate this young man who has been in Corsica for only a month. Fortunately, the current situation in Corsica is very critical, and Paulie can only temporarily put aside his fear and criticism of Lawrence, hoping that Lawrence can use his ability in the right way. As for how Paulie would treat him after the situation stabilized, Lawrence knew without thinking that it would be endless suppression and containment to ensure that Lawrence would be pinned to death in his current position and could not make any progress. Therefore, this crisis for Corsica was an opportunity that Lawrence must seize. Lawrence laughed twice and changed the subject carelessly. He knew that Paulie would not continue to care about his small irregular behavior at this time. The hour hand of the clock tower of the governor's mansion turned past 10 o'clock, and the low and melodious bell sounded throughout the East City district. Silence, silence. The bishop who served as the chairman stood on the podium and waved his hand to indicate that the meeting had begun. The participants stopped chatting tacitly and sat upright facing the bishop. Only the West City District Councillor, who was the focus of Lawrence, after putting out his cigar, still leaned lazily on the back of the chair. Who is this person? Should I say he is unconventional or presumptuous? Lawrence glanced at the councillor and thought strangely. In front of each member of parliament were 2 thick books. The black cover was the Latin version of the Bible, and the white cover was the Corsican constitution promulgated by Paulie. According to the procedure, each participant needed to swear on the Bible and the Constitution respectively, indicating that he would reasonably use the power given to him by God in the law. As an engineering man from the future, Lawrence was a staunch atheist, but he still pretended to go through the whole process. After all, in this era, when the church's power was still deeply rooted, unbelievers were regarded as a sin. Ahem. Let's start today's agenda. After taking the lead in swearing, the bishop cleared his throat and began to preside over the parliament. The first item. Regarding the ownership of some grasslands in the southern plains. Although this was Lawrence's first important meeting, he couldn't help but feel sleepy after a while. It was really that the speeches of these members were all old-fashioned clichés, and everyone spoke incessantly, which made people wonder how their voters could endure it. The issues discussed were all trivial matters in Lawrence's opinion. There was even a motion about two sons fighting for their father's inheritance, which caused the farmers' councillors to argue for a full hour. Several times, Lawrence saw his brother, a lawyer, trying to put forward legal opinions, but was completely suppressed by the roar of a loud female councillor. Fortunately, there were still people who shared the same idea as Lawrence. Several councillors from Ajaccio obviously did not care about these rural affairs, and abstained from voting on several motions. The elderly bishop almost fell asleep while standing. It was not until the bell rang at noon that the bishop woke up, clapped his hands to interrupt a councillor who was speaking at length, and announced a recess, and the second half would resume at 2 p.m. According to convention, the agenda of the second half basically involves Ajaccio, and there is an extremely important proposal to withdraw troops from the north. It seems that it will not be so boring. Governor Pauly beside him sighed slightly. As the leader of Corsica, he had to pay attention to even these messy and minor proposals. Just concentrating on listening to these arguments was quite a tiring task. Alas. A perfect version of the 16-9 book forum. Lawrence sighed in a pretentious way. Huh? What's wrong, Lawrence? Pauly turned his head and asked. I suddenly feel a little emotional, Governor. Lawrence shook his head, his face full of sorrow, and said, I realize that these 9 members present are the ones who decide the fate of Corsica. Pauly frowned, not understanding what Lawrence meant, and said, any questions? Of course not. Lawrence waved his hand exaggeratedly, then held his forehead and sighed, saying, they are all good, but, among this group of people, there are no diplomats, no economists, no soldiers, no philosophers, no scholars, and no workers. A few self-contained farmers and a few profit-seeking businessmen actually decided the fate of our country. Pauly was silent. As experienced as he was, he now fully understood what Lawrence wanted to say, but he would not take the initiative to say it. Lawrence also knew what Pauly was thinking, so he spoke for him. Will the decisions made by these people really be beneficial to Corsica? Pauly was silent again, until almost all the participants in the auditorium had dispersed, and he still did not speak. Lawrence did not urge him, nor did he make any other movements, just sitting there. But, Pauly finally spoke. His voice was low but very serious. This is the people making the decision. This is not the real people making the decision. Lawrence stared straight into Pauly's eyes and said word by word, when Corsica is occupied by the French, these merchants will pack up their money and fly away. These farmers will still own their land, but the people of Corsica will always be slaves of the French. And these people will not take any responsibility for this. They enjoy the power given to them by the people, but they will not fulfill any obligations to the people. Pauly closed his eyes, seeming very tired, and seemed to be avoiding Lawrence's eyes. After a long time, he spoke, Dear Lawrence, what do you want to say? Lawrence clenched his fist and slammed it on the table. Governor, we can't let the Corsica ship leak from the top. Chapter 19. Testing. Leaking from the top is a pretty vivid description. Pauly laughed twice, although there was more helplessness in his laughter. But dear Lawrence, I'm just a captain. I can't repair the boat. Lawrence pursued relentlessly. He had to persuade Pauly as soon as possible to prepare for the worst. Even if the parliament rejected the proposal to withdraw troops, he had to be prepared to force it. No, Governor, you can. The Corsican army will not obey the parliament as long as you. By the way, Lawrence, this is your first time to have lunch in the governor's palace. The grilled sea bass here is very good. Remember to try it. Turn right out of the restaurant and see you in the afternoon. Pauly stood up straight, interrupted Lawrence's words, and walked out of the auditorium without looking back. Lawrence sat in his seat, watching Pauly's back disappear at the door, but he was not discouraged. From Pauly's reaction, Lawrence could see that his words definitely touched him, but he just didn't make up his mind. Anyway, there was a long meeting in the afternoon, and Lawrence was not in a hurry to persuade Pauly in the short 2 hours of the half time. Forget it, let's try the grilled sea bass that Pauly mentioned. I hope there's some left. Lawrence stood up and stretched his muscles. He felt like his bones were about to fall apart after sitting for the whole morning. Then he walked out of the auditorium. As soon as Lawrence walked out of the door, he saw a waiter in a vest next to him, who seemed to be waiting for him. Sure enough, when he saw Lawrence leaving, the waiter hurriedly came forward and said, "Sir, someone invited you to the garden for a chat." Garden? Lawrence couldn't help but frown and asked, "Is it Carlo?" Lawrence didn't think it was any lady who invited him. Besides, the only woman in the auditorium just now was the sturdy farmer's aunt. No, it's not Senator Carlo, it's another senator, the one who's dressed a little inappropriately. The waiter lowered his head and replied, "Senator who was dressed inappropriately?" Lawrence immediately thought of the senator from Zichan district who had behaved strangely and arrogantly. But he didn't know him, so why would he send someone to invite him? But, he is from Zichan district. Could it be related to the trade union? Lawrence touched his chin, thinking about it, and this was the only reason. In a chaotic place like Zichan district, only the trade union has the ability to support a councillor. But what always puzzled Lawrence was that as a puppet, the Zichan district councillor acted too arrogantly. Moreover, the cold and dangerous feeling on him was really not something that ordinary people could have. Standing here and guessing for a day would not yield any results, so Lawrence decided to go to the garden to find out. This is the governor's mansion, and the people in the trade union would not dare to attack Lawrence here, even if they had 10 times the courage. Lawrence nodded to the waiter, and then followed the waiter to the private garden of the governor's mansion. Although the Mediterranean in January was quite cold, there were still hundreds of flowers blooming in the garden, and there were countless vanillas and orchids. Among them, a few larks were specially raised, and their calls were euphemistic and beautiful. However, Lawrence was not in the mood to appreciate and identify these flowers and plants. After crossing rows of neatly trimmed shrubs, Lawrence finally found the person he had invited in the depths of the garden. It was indeed the councilman from the West City district. "Mr. Lawrence Bonaparte, I have heard of your name for a long time." The councilman turned around and stared at Lawrence expressionlessly while extending his right hand. "We don't know each other." Lawrence stood there, frowning instead of shaking hands with him. Seeing that Lawrence did not extend his hand, the other party was neither angry nor embarrassed, slowly put his hand down, and looked at Lawrence carefully again. This look was like a sculptor checking his work. "No, in fact, we both know each other's name." The councilman suddenly said, "Let me introduce myself. My name is Cyril Russell, the chief of the Dock Workers Union." "Cyril Russell?" Exclamation mark. "Cyril, the chief of the union?" Exclamation mark. The elusive shadow that made the one-eyed man tremble? Lawrence frowned and subconsciously took a step back. If this wasn't the governor's mansion, Lawrence would have drawn his gun when he heard this. Thinking rapidly, Lawrence took a deep breath and calmed down, knowing that Zillow would not attack him here no matter what. If the man in front of him was Zillow, then combined with the description of the one-eyed man, it could correspond to the strange behaviors in the morning. "I'm afraid that the only person who can be elected as a member of the West City District is this Zillow Russell." "What's wrong, Mr. Bonaparte? We have no grudges. Why is there such a big hostility?" Zillow asked in a puzzled manner. From his expression to his tone, he seemed like an ordinary and innocent member of the parliament. "No grudges? The one-eyed man is from your union, right? He wants to chop me into a human stick and throw me into the sea." Lawrence snorted coldly and said with a stern face, "Ah, so that's it. I'm sorry that I didn't manage the union well enough." Zillow said with regret, "The union will fully support the patrol and the subsequent court's treatment of One Eye and is willing to compensate Mr. Bonaparte for your losses." A perfect version in 16:9 book bar. Lawrence didn't say anything. He didn't know what tricks this Zillow was playing. Seeing Lawrence was silent, Zillow continued, "Besides this, there is no conflict between us. As for the members executed by Mr. Bonaparte, they all deserved it, and the union also supports this." Zillow's words were very sincere. Even Lawrence felt for a moment that Zillow was like a poor man who was asking for the blame for his subordinates' mistakes. But after a little thought, Lawrence immediately threw this idea out of his head. Zillow couldn't help but avenge One Eye and those union members, otherwise his unshakable position in the union would inevitably be challenged. Of course, I have also heard rumors from the outside world that the patrol team and the union are already at loggerheads. I'm really saddened by this rumor. Mr. Bonaparte, let us shake hands and make peace. Zero's tone became excited, and he stretched out his right hand again, wanting to shake hands with Lawrence. Sorry, Chief Zero, there is not much time left in the half time, and I haven't had lunch yet. Excuse me. Lawrence ignored Zero, and turned around, and left directly after saying this. Whether logically or formally, Lawrence did not believe that Zero was sincere in seeking peace. If he really wanted to live in peace with Lawrence, he would have said this in the auditorium just now, while the parliamentarians had not left, instead of in this quiet garden. As for his purpose, it was just to let himself relax his guard. This low-level trick would not fool Lawrence, even if Zero had good acting skills. Just a few minutes after Lawrence left, the waiter walked into the garden, came to Zluo and asked, "Lord Zluo, what's going on?" Zluo took out another cigar, trimmed it, lit it and put it in his mouth, saying indifferently, "Anyway, it's just a test. If he agrees, it can only mean that he is a fool without a brain, although there are many fools who believe everything others say." "Then, he didn't agree?" asked the subordinate. "Yes." Zluo took a deep puff of the cigar, blew out a smoke ring, and said, "It seems that he still has some brains. This is at least more interesting. I don't want to calculate for a long time and find out that I calculated a fool." The subordinate nodded and continued to ask, "Then what should we do next?" Humph. Zluo snorted disdainfully, extinguished the cigar, threw it on the ground, and said, "I have submitted a proposal to the parliament. Doesn't he like to give money? Let him give more. Doesn't he like to win over the masses? Let him win over more." The parliament in the second half of the afternoon seemed to be uneasy. Chapter 20 Calculation. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the bells of the clock tower rang again in the governor's mansion. After the lunch break, the participants in the auditorium returned to their seats with rosy faces. It seems that the restaurant in the governor's mansion is really rich. Governor Paulie still looked exhausted. Whether it was the whole morning of listening, or Lawrence's last words, Paulie couldn't rest for a moment and kept thinking. "Governor Paulie, how was your rest?" Lawrence seemed to ask with concern, but in fact he was hinting at how Paulie thought about his words. Paulie also understood the meaning behind Lawrence's words and said, "I didn't rest much. I was reviewing the afternoon's proposals." Among the afternoon's proposals, the most important one was undoubtedly the last one, the proposal to withdraw troops. The implicit meaning of Paulie's words was also very obvious. "I won't consider it for the time being. Let's see how the parliament's attitude towards the withdrawal is." Lawrence nodded and didn't ask any more questions. He also understood what Paulie meant. Ahem. The bishop cleared his throat and announced the start of the afternoon meeting. "The next motion is about cutting the budget allocation for the Ajaccio orphanage." The topics of the second half of the meeting were basically focused on Ajaccio, and the intensity of the discussion increased a lot. Although the farmer councillors represented their hometown cities, they all lived in Ajaccio for a long time like Carlo, so these topics also involved their interests. Although the motions mentioned all the things in Ajaccio, Lawrence didn't pay much attention to it because he didn't have the right to vote and these things didn't have much to do with him. But for some reason, Zero, like Lawrence, didn't care about these motions and only expressed strong opposition to the motion to cut the budget allocation for the orphanage. After an unknown amount of time, the bishop clapped his hands and announced loudly, "Okay, the discussion on the proposal to repair the streets in the northern part of the city is over. Since the number of votes in favor and against is the same, it will be discussed again at the next regular meeting of the parliament. Now let's move on to the next proposal." The bishop said, took a look at the agenda, and then said with a strange expression, "The next proposal is proposed by Ciro Russell, a councillor of the western part of Ajaccio." Lawrence immediately raised his head and was fully alert. After a direct contact with Ciro, Lawrence had to take seriously every move made by this conspirator who was sweet-mouthed but treacherous. No one knew that perhaps an insignificant matter would become the keynote of the conspiracy network woven by Ciro. The other councillors present also felt a little strange. because in their impression, this Ciro Russell rarely even participated in the parliament, and he gave up his voting rights every time for various reasons, and rarely appeared in everyone's field of vision. Today, Ciro not only attended the parliament as a non-voting delegate, but also submitted a proposal, which surprised and curious everyone. What Councillor Ciro proposed is, the bishop said, after taking a look at the outline, his face even more strange, and he announced, a discussion on increasing the size and authority of the Ajaccio patrol. What? Most of the people present, including Lawrence, were surprised. Everyone knew that Lawrence, as the actual head of the patrol, had a deep hatred with the Union. Not only did he publicly execute Union members, but he also imprisoned One Eye, a well-known leader in the Union, in the dungeon of the patrol. Instead of retaliating, Ciro wanted to help the patrol expand its size and authority? Could it be that Councillor Ciro has put aside his past grudges and taken the initiative to show goodwill to Lawrence? I guess so. It seems that Councillor Ciro is really a noble man. Yes, Napoleon Bonaparte is also a young man with excellent character. The two of them will definitely put aside their past grudges in the future. Some councillors began to whisper with the people around them. They didn't know Ciro's terrible reputation in the underground world, and thought that Ciro took the initiative to ask for peace with Lawrence, and they all sighed. Something is wrong. Lawrence touched his chin and vaguely sensed something strange. He was sure that Zluo could not be kind enough to help him expand his power, let alone seek peace with him. Silence. Silence. The bishop shouted to calm the chatter below, and then began to read the outline of the motion. Member Zluo hopes to double the size of the patrol team to about 100 people. At the same time, given that the public security situation in Zychyn district is very poor, he hopes that the patrol team can be stationed in Zychyn district to maintain order and public security. In addition, the bishop continued to read, due to the extremely high unemployment rate in Zychyn district, Councillor Zluo suggests that all new members of the patrol team be recruited from Zychyn district. TSK, you really have no good intentions. Lawrence curled his lips and saw through Zluo's thoughts at a glance. Expanding the size of the patrol team, but recruiting from Zychyn district. This is undoubtedly Zluo's intention, to put his own people under Lawrence. In addition, Lawrence must treat the new members equally, and let them share the wealth with the old members. If Lawrence doesn't want to reduce the share of the old team members, he must pay out of his own pocket to subsidize the new team members, which is absolutely impossible with his current income level. Finally, asking the patrol team to enter Zychyn district is a big challenge for Lawrence. The gang forces in Zychyn district are complicated, and it is not easy to maintain law and order. As long as Lawrence fails to do a little bit, coupled with Zluo's secret instigation, he will not only fail to get the support of the people, but will be despised by them. Not to mention that there is Zluo's base camp there. He will definitely send people to obstruct him in every possible way. Lawrence is afraid that he will be unable to move forward in Zychyn district. Naked conspiracy. This damn Zluo has some tricks. Lawrence's eyes were cold, and he glanced at Zluo, who was showing a fake smile to everyone, and thought so. Since Lawrence attended the meeting as a staff officer, he had no right to speak or vote, so he had to sit in his seat and listen quietly to the debate of the members. After a heated discussion, the members finally began to vote. Fortunately, Lawrence gave Carlo a look, signaling him to vote against it. The final vote was 4 in favor, 4 against, and 1 abstention. Lawrence breathed a sigh of relief. At least this way he could postpone this issue to the next meeting. Check out the correct version on the 16 to 9 book forum. Have all the members confirmed their vote? If they all confirm, then this issue will be left until. The bishop was speaking at the podium, but was suddenly interrupted by 2 coughs. Everyone immediately focused their attention on the top of the long table. Ahem. I would like to express my opinion as well. It was Governor Pauly who interrupted the bishop and stood up and said. Lawrence frowned slightly, with a bad feeling. Although Pauly had no voting rights, as the highest official in Corsica, he could certainly express his opinion on the bill. I think this bill is still very valuable. If it can be passed as soon as possible, it will be of great benefit to the development of Corsica. When saying this, Pauly also emphasized the word as soon as possible, implying that he hoped to pass the bill now. The parliamentarians were not stupid people. They immediately understood Pauli's meaning and raised their hands to signal the bishop that they had not yet confirmed the vote in order to show goodwill to Pauli. Even Carlo, after seeing that it would be useless to continue to vote against it, made an apologetic gesture to Lawrence and confirmed that he would vote in favor. Lawrence sat in his seat expressionlessly and nodded to Carlo. He did not care about Carlo's normal speculative behavior. As for Pauli, this old fox must have seen what Ciro meant and deliberately used his influence to pass the bill so as to hit Lawrence. At the same time, Pauli continued, Mr. Bonaparte, the deputy captain of the Ajaccio patrol, is also in the meeting. We might as well listen to his opinions. Lawrence couldn't help but secretly rolled his eyes. Pauli was obviously afraid that he would hit him too hard so that he would be completely at a disadvantage in the struggle with Ciro, so he wanted to take the opportunity to put forward some more conditions. This old fox is really good at balancing things. Lawrence thought to himself, then stood up, bowed to everyone, and said, I agree with the opinions of Senator Ciro and Governor Pauli, but at the same time, as the deputy captain of the patrol team, I also propose to amend this motion. In order to ensure the quality of patrol soldiers, I hope that when recruiting more soldiers, the patrol team can independently select suitable candidates. Pauli nodded, knowing that Lawrence was trying to prevent Ciro from inserting people into Lawrence's team, and it was not an excessive condition. So he said, Mr. Bonaparte's suggestion makes sense. Senator Ciro, what do you think? I agree. Ciro said. He also saw that Pauli was trying to check and balance him and Lawrence, so he directly accepted Lawrence's proposal. Seeing that Ciro, the proposer, and Governor Pauli agreed with Lawrence's suggestion, other congressmen followed suit and expressed their agreement with Lawrence's amendment to the motion. Pauli sat back in his seat and whispered to Lawrence beside him, this is for the benefit of Corsica. Lawrence smiled and said nothing. He did not think Pauli's behavior was a betrayal, but silently praised it as an excellent means of checks and balances. If it were him, he might have used more drastic means. But, Lawrence thought to himself, Governor, if it is for the benefit of Corsica, when one day I need to sit in your chair, I will not hesitate to replace you. Chapter 21 Plan. 8 in favor, 1 abstention. The bishop glanced at the parliamentarians and solemnly knocked the gavel twice on the table, saying, the Ajaccio patrol expansion bill passed. The parliamentarians clapped their hands symbolically to celebrate, and Lawrence also raised his hand and clapped twice, but his expression was very solemn. Ciro Russell tricked me in the first confrontation. Lawrence glanced at Ciro, who was still doing his own thing, and felt that he had previously looked down on this conspirator, who was one of the few in the Ajaccio underground world. However, Ciro's plan this time is also an opportunity. Lawrence supported his head and began to draw up a plan for the future. In any case, the number of soldiers under Lawrence's charge has doubled, which is a real increase in power, and he must make good use of it. As for financial problems, we can only hope that the leaders of the West City District are as wealthy as One Eye. In addition, we must find a way to get our hands on the unexplored silver mine on Corsica. A gleam flashed in Lawrence's eyes, and he nodded to confirm his plan. However, the most important thing at the moment is to persuade Pauli to order a withdrawal as soon as possible. So Lawrence put aside his future plans in the West City District and focused on the current parliament. After the bill to expand the patrol team was passed, several proposals in a row were trivial matters, and only a few were unanimously agreed upon and passed by the parliamentarians. Lawrence waited patiently, knowing that only the last bill on the agenda was the highlight of the day. Finally, after rejecting an absurd proposal to force all Corsicans to wear uniform clothing, the bishop cleared his throat, his expression more serious than ever before. Some members who got wind of the news could not help but sit up straight. Even Ciro, who had been lazily leaning on the back of his chair, was stroking his chin with his hand with a solemn expression. It seemed that his main purpose of coming to the parliament today was to discuss the withdrawal of troops. Ladies and gentlemen, the last motion of today's meeting is about withdrawing the northern front of Corsica to the south. It was proposed by General Pasquale Paoli. What? Absolutely not. A member of the parliament from the northern region, stood up immediately after hearing this and said excitedly, "The people in my constituency are all in the north. If we withdraw our troops, are we going to let them be ravaged by the Genoese? That's right. Unacceptable." The other two members whose constituencies are also in the north also stood up one after another and firmly expressed their opposition. The member who stood up first shouted at Paoli, "Governor Paoli, please accept my question. We have driven the Genoese to the northern coast. Why do we have to withdraw our troops?" Paoli did not stand up, but gestured to Lawrence, indicating that he should explain. Lawrence nodded and stood up, facing all the congressmen, and said, "As the governor's staff, please allow me to explain. This is out of strategic considerations. The specific details involve confidentiality and cannot be disclosed." But the congressman was speechless for a moment. Military power and intelligence have always been controlled by Paoli, and they don't know what strategic needs there are. Seeing that Lawrence's words about military secrets blocked the mouths of the congressman and the situation was deadlocked, Zeluo suddenly straightened his clothes, stood up and said with a smile, "Can I interrupt for a few words?" Of course. The congressman who was speechless just now was worried about being at a loss for words, and when he saw Zeluo wanted to speak, he sat down quickly. Lawrence frowned. This Zeluo always gave him an unpredictable feeling, and he didn't know what he wanted to do. "Excuse me, Mr. Staff Officer, although I fully support Governor Paoli's judgment, how should the people living in the northern region be dealt with?" Zeluo asked the question that everyone was concerned about. Lawrence was well prepared for this and answered confidently, "The people in front of the new front will be evacuated by us and given corresponding economic compensation." "Can all of them be evacuated?" Zero asked incisively, directly pointing out the crux of the problem. Lawrence shook his head and said frankly, "No guarantee. Look, my fellow parliamentarians." Zero's voice became excited, waving his arms and looking around at the parliamentarians present. "How can we accept such disregard for the lives of the Corsican people? The parliament agreed to withdraw the army from the north today, and it can agree to withdraw the army from the south tomorrow, and all this requires only a slogan of military secrets." After that, Zero stared at Lawrence again and said in an exaggerated panic, "Mr. Staff Officer, you will not dissolve the parliament the day after tomorrow on the grounds of military secrets. I'm sorry, but I can't, and have no right to reveal more." After Lawrence said this, he ignored Zero, returned to his seat and sat down, and then whispered to Paoli, "I'm sorry, Governor, I really can't say more about the plan itself." Paoli nodded, but suddenly said casually, "That's true, but I heard that your eloquence is much better than what you said just now." Lawrence smiled awkwardly and made a sloppy comment, "Maybe it's just a misunderstanding." "Really?" Paul glanced at Lawrence with a hint of meaning. Lawrence sat in his seat, gritted his teeth calmly, and thought, "This old fox probably noticed it too. I don't want the parliament to agree to withdraw the troops." A correct version in 1619 book bar. That's right. After talking with Paul, Lawrence has determined that Paul will definitely carry out the plan to the end, and if the parliament opposes the withdrawal, then Paul and Lawrence can only use other methods to bypass the parliament in private. At that time, in order to prevent the plan from being exposed, Paul is very likely to let Lawrence be responsible for and lead the withdrawal. In this way, Lawrence will have the opportunity to reach out to the army, a forbidden area completely controlled by Paul. While Lawrence was thinking, there were several arguments on the field, but all the members from other places expressed strong opposition to the withdrawal. During this process, as the initiator of the motion, Paul always leaned on the chair with his eyes closed and rested, without saying a word, as if no matter what was discussed on the field, it had nothing to do with him. Next, let's vote by raising hands. The bishop clapped his hands to interrupt the speeches of the parliamentarians, indicating that the voting stage had begun. After a simple count, the bishop announced loudly, 3 votes in favor, 1 abstention, and 5 votes against. The proposal has not been passed. All the votes against came from parliamentarians outside Ajaccio. Even the parliamentarians in the southern region were touched by Ciro's words, worried that after setting such a precedent, the interests of their constituencies would not be guaranteed. The parliamentarians in Ajaccio, except for Ciro's abstention, all voted in favor. They were basically people who leaned towards Paul's faction. Listening to the bishop's announcement that the proposal was rejected, Paulie just sighed slightly, not knowing what he was thinking. Lawrence remained calm, with a slight smile on his face. Everything was in his plan. It was impossible for those parliamentarians outside Ajaccio to agree to such a proposal. After the last proposal was opposed by the parliament, today's meeting was declared over, and the parliamentarians walked out of the auditorium chatting in pairs. Lawrence, come to my study. Paulie opened his eyes and said to Lawrence. The two of them went directly back to Paul's study from the auditorium. Paulie then closed the door to ensure that no one would suddenly break in, and spoke first. Do you have any ideas? Lawrence pulled out a chair and sat down, saying, it's still the same sentence. The army is in your hands, not in the hands of the parliament. But I need to listen to the parliament. Paulie rubbed his forehead tiredly. But your army doesn't need it. Alas, Paulie sighed, and then fell into a long silence. Lawrence did not speak or make any movement as he did at noon, but just waited quietly for Paulie to think. Time seemed to stand still, and the two men who were about to influence the fate of Corsica were now like two stone sculptures, motionless and silent. It was unknown how long it took before Paulie slowly spoke, as if he had exhausted all his strength, and said, you are right. For Corsica, this must be done. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 22 Expansion. Have you thought about it? Lawrence suppressed his inner joy and asked in a deep voice. Paulie closed his eyes. Today, the wrinkles on his face seemed to be more obvious. He said, I will order the army to withdraw to the south in the near future. Even now, Lawrence's eyes became sharp. He had been scheming until now, just to be able to insert his hand into the military. Now he is only half a step away from achieving his goal. Excuse me, Governor. Lawrence stared at Paul's tired eyes and said seriously, I don't recommend directly resisting the parliament. Paulie also understood this truth. The existence of the parliamentary system played a huge role in the internal stability of Corsica. If he openly violated the decision of the parliament, it might sow the seeds for unrest. If it weren't for the survival of Corsica, Paulie would not want to make such an extraordinary move. Paul and Lawrence looked at each other and asked in confusion, what do you want to say? We need a reason to withdraw our troops. You mean to direct and act in a play? Let part of the army pretend to be Genoese to attack us, and then force us to retreat. Paul frowned and asked. He had thought of this method before, but because it was too risky and there was a high possibility of leaking the news, Paul quickly rejected it. Lawrence shook his head. He also understood the many disadvantages of this plan and continued, we are indeed the directors, but the actors are not only Corsicans. Paul was a little surprised. You want to drag the Genoese into it? Lawrence nodded firmly. If he wanted to make the fake play real, and make the representatives of the parliament unable to catch any handle, he had to find a way to attract the Genoese army to take the initiative to advance to Corsica. What are you going to do? Paul asked cautiously. When it comes to military affairs, Paul can't afford to be careless. In particular, he had to actively attract the Genoese to attack. If he didn't handle it well, the northern part of Corsica would inevitably be plundered. Lawrence had already prepared a plan and replied, send someone to lead a small team to launch a feint attack on the Genoa fortress. If they are counterattacked, they will retreat immediately, pretending to suffer heavy casualties. Repeat this many times to lure them into chasing. It is somewhat feasible. Paulie nodded slightly, his eyes narrowed into a line, glanced at Lawrence, and said, but you want to carry out this task yourself, right? Lawrence's calculations certainly could not be hidden from Paul's mind, but Lawrence did not intend to hide his idea of joining the army until now, because he knew that, if Paulie approved this plan, there would be no other suitable candidate to be sent to execute it except himself. No matter who he chose, there was a risk of exposing the entire plan, and such a risk was something Paulie could not bear. Although the intention to intervene in the army was quite obvious, Lawrence certainly would not point it out directly, so he smiled and said, everything depends on your arrangement, Governor. If no one else is suitable, I'm willing to take the risk to go. Paulie also knew that, even if he sent his most trusted officer, there was still a possibility that the plan would be exposed. After some hesitation, he decided to take a step back and acquiesced to Lawrence's request. Sending you is the safest choice. I will grant you a military rank in the near future. However, I will also send an adjutant to accompany you. Lawrence nodded to show that he understood. Although he would only lead a small part of the troops in the army, it did not mean that Paulie could let Lawrence act at will. It was more reasonable to send an adjutant as a restraint. Afterwards, Paulie discussed and polished the details of the plan with Lawrence. Although Lawrence was quick-witted and had many ingenious ideas, he came from the peaceful 21st century after all, and knew nothing about marching and fighting. Therefore, in terms of specific implementation, Lawrence had to listen to the opinions of Paulie and the future adjutant. After making a thorough decision to withdraw the troops without telling the parliament, Paulie was obviously relieved. As the founder and leader of Corsica, he had too many factors to consider. After making up his mind to withdraw the troops, he put down a big stone in his heart. Just when Paulie thought Lawrence was going to say goodbye and leave, Lawrence suddenly said, "By the way, Governor Paulie, regarding the expansion of the patrol team, I need to request a batch of new equipment." Paulie nodded and agreed. This was a very reasonable request, so he asked, "What do you need?" 80 muskets. 80? Okay, I'll send someone to your station. Paulie wanted to refuse after hearing this. With 80 muskets combined with the original 20 in the team, Lawrence could already form a small army. But thinking that he and Lawrence would cooperate for quite a while, he agreed. In his eyes, Lawrence was still just a young man who had just arrived in Corsica for a month, and Paulie was confident that he could control him under his own hands. In addition, Paulie could tell from the 80 guns that the West City district would be in turmoil for some time to come. Watching Lawrence's back disappear at the door, Paulie said to himself, "Boy, I hope you are really capable of rectifying the West City district." It was already evening when he walked out of Paulie's study. The afternoon parliament had been in session for 4 hours, which really exhausted Lawrence. Lawrence had just walked to the door of the governor's mansion when he saw that there seemed to be a commotion at the gate. A short old man was being pinned to the ground by 2 guards, and one of the guards was putting handcuffs on the old man's wrist. Wait. Lawrence frowned and glanced at the old man. He immediately recognized that it was his subordinate, Old Scene, but he didn't recognize him at first glance because he was in casual clothes. A perfect version at 1619 book bar. What happened? Lawrence stepped forward quickly and asked sternly. "Mr. Bonaparte." Old Scene, who was pinned to the ground, shouted excitedly and anxiously. The 2 guards looked at each other, and one of them said, "Mr. Bonaparte, this man has been sneaking around in front of the governor's palace for a long time. He didn't do anything out of the ordinary, let him go." Lawrence waved his hand and squatted down to help Old Scene up. But according to the rules, he must be imprisoned. The guard said, standing still, with no intention of untying the shackles for Old Scene. Lawrence's face sank. His sharp eyes stared straight into the other's eyes and whispered, "This is my man." The guard trembled all over, as if he was stared at by a mature African lion, and a layer of cold sweat suddenly appeared on his forehead. He hurriedly said, "I'm sorry, I didn't know it was Mr. Bonaparte's men." After that, the guard wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, hurriedly untied the handcuffs for Old Scene, and bowed repeatedly to apologize to him. When Lawrence and Old Scene walked away, the guard recovered and said to his companion, "Oh my god, this is Mr. Bonaparte. He is so protective of his subordinates. If our captain is like this, it would be great. That old cucumber who eats his own people. He will always try to squeeze a few silver coins from us. Don't count on him. It is a blessing from God to have a leader like Mr. Bonaparte." At the same time, Old Scene was gasping for breath. He had just pushed and shoved with the guards, which really made his old bones a little bit tired. He said intermittently, "Oh my god, Lord Bonaparte, it's true. I have been waiting for you for 2 hours. Something big has happened." Lawrence frowned slightly, wondering if something happened in the patrol team. "Speak slowly, there is no hurry." Old Scene took a deep breath, his face full of panic and self-blame, and said in a trembling voice, "One I escaped from prison. Chapter 23 Accident. One Eye escaped from prison. Lawrence frowned even more tightly. This was beyond his expectation. The patrol dungeon was not impregnable, but it was not enough to allow an injured and unarmed person to escape. Lawrence had been to the patrol dungeon several times. It was originally where the Genoese held prisoners. Each cell was extremely sturdy. The iron door was half a foot thick, and there was not even enough space between the iron bars for a cat to get out. What's the specific situation? Lawrence did not panic. No matter what had happened, he had to keep a cool head to face it. I don't know much either. Old Scene lowered his head in shame. When Lawrence left, he handed over all the affairs of the team to him. He did not expect that such a big mistake would happen under his own hands. I only know that One Eye somehow broke out of the cell, killed a guard on duty in the dungeon with his bare hands, snatched the key to the cell, and released the other prisoners, and then they rushed out of the station together. Old Scene whispered, sneaking a glance at Lawrence's face anxiously. He was not so nervous, even when he was pinned to the ground by the two guards just now. Although Lawrence and the soldiers in the patrol team were brothers, Old Scene did not forget that when Lawrence came to the patrol team on the first day, he drew his knife and pointed at his group without mercy. No one knew how Lawrence would deal with Old Scene after such a serious accident. Other prisoners? Were they all released? Lawrence asked. Even he could not accept the consequences of dozens of prisoners escaping from the dungeon together. No. One Eye probably feared our revenge, so he only let go his men, less than 10 of them. Old Scene waved his hand to explain. If that was the case, he would not dare to come to see Lawrence tonight, and would have packed up his money and bought a boat ticket to flee abroad. Would One Eye be afraid of the patrol's revenge? Lawrence shook his head slightly, rejecting Old Scene's words in his heart. A man as cruel and bloodthirsty as One Eye must have hated Lawrence to the bone. If he planned the jailbreak alone, he would have released all the prisoners to avenge himself. In Lawrence's view, this jailbreak was too coincidental in terms of timing and target, and it was definitely not something that a simple-minded reckless man like One Eye could accomplish alone. Cyril Russell. This name suddenly popped up in Lawrence's mind. From the perspective of motivation and logic, Lawrence did not believe that this jailbreak was not done by this bastard hiding in the dark. Rushing back to the base with Old Scene, Lawrence first went to the dungeon to check for traces at the scene. Behind him followed Old Scene and a trembling patrolman. He was supposed to be on duty in the dungeon with the guard killed by the One Eye, but he left his post to hang out in the tavern. Now he was drunk and was waiting for Lawrence's disposal in fear. Everything in the cell where the One Eye lived was normal. The lock of the iron door was not damaged, and there was no sign of violent impact on the iron fence. The patrolmen delivered food to the prisoners through a small movable door next to the iron door, and would not rashly enter the cell. That is to say, the One Eye opened the door from the inside and killed the guard on duty. Lawrence analyzed silently. Judging from the traces at the scene, there should be no mistake. With the physical fitness and combat experience of the One Eye, even if he was injured, it would be easy for him to kill an unsuspecting patrolman. But where did the One Eye get the cell key? Lawrence touched his chin, suddenly turned his head, and asked the patrolman who neglected his duty, "What's your name?" "Sir, my name is Jan." Jan replied in a trembling voice. This young man, who looked only in his 20s, had a cold sweat that had completely wet his back. "How are the keys to each cell kept?" Lawrence continued to ask. Although there was no emotion in his tone, there was a sense of authority. Jan trembled and couldn't say a complete sentence for a long time. Seeing this, Old Scene interrupted directly and said, "The key to each cell is different. There are 2 keychains in total, one for each of the 2 guards on duty." Lawrence nodded, looked at Jan, and asked, "Is your key still there?" Yes. Of course I won't lose this one too." Jan said quickly, took out a large bunch of keychains that were rustling around his waist, and handed it to Lawrence. Lawrence did not reach out to take it, but continued to ask, "How many keys are there?" Jan was stunned for a moment and said, "There are 100 cells here. Of course there are 100 keys." Lawrence closed his eyes, sighed, and asked impatiently, "I asked you how many keys are there?" Seeing that Jan was still stunned, Old Scene quickly slapped Jan on the back of his head and cursed, "Big. Can't you count how many there are?" Jan only then reacted and hurriedly looked at Lawrence to apologize, raised the keychain in his hand to his chest, and counted them one by one. Ah, yes, I'll count now. 1, 2, 3, 96, 97, 98, 99. How could it be? Jan's face was full of disbelief. This keychain has always been hanging on his waist. How could one key be missing out of thin air? And combined with the current situation, the one missing is the one in the one-eyed cell. Sure enough, Lawrence slowly opened his eyes, knowing that things were not that simple, and continued to ask, why did you go to the tavern to drink? Who invited you? Who did you drink with? A correct version in the 16:9 book forum. After hearing this, Jan's eyes wandered for a moment, hesitating, as if he was a little embarrassed to speak, and struggled for a while before saying, a girl, I love her very much, but we have always been tepid before, and today she suddenly invited me to drink. When old Scene heard this, he was furious, and slapped Jan on the back of the head again, cursing, you are a beast who can't control your lower body. A woman can seduce your soul with just a few words. What a disaster you have caused. Lawrence smiled slightly, waved his hand to stop old Scene, and joked, okay, old Scene, if you were 40 years younger, you wouldn't be much better. Old Scene scratched his head embarrassedly and smiled, and the tense atmosphere in the dungeon finally eased a little. Jan looked up gratefully and secretly glanced at Lawrence, thinking that this kind-hearted man was not going to pursue his fault. However, Lawrence's next words made Jan feel like he was falling into an ice cave. Old Scene, take people and bring the girl here immediately. Jan, you lead the way. Wait, Lord Bonaparte. She is a good girl, she couldn't have stolen her. Jan waved his hands excitedly, trying his best to persuade Lawrence, but Lawrence just calmly waved his hand to signal old Scene to set off immediately, and said, it's up to me to decide whether it's good or not. Old Scene pulled Jan, who was stunned in place, and said angrily, boy, your negligence caused the death of a patrol brother, and Lord Bonaparte can shoot you now for this. But you still want to save face in front of a woman. Seeing Jan still being dragged out of the dungeon by old Scene in a daze, Lawrence couldn't help but sigh. If my guess is correct, this kid is going to suffer a setback. Lawrence thought. Thanks to the two book friends Fusheng Yuo Meng and Qinhuang Zhao Zeng for their recommendation votes. During the new book period, I hope everyone will support it. It would be great if you can vote ORZ. Chapter 24 Conquer. By the time old Scene and Jan returned to the station, it was almost midnight. When old Scene walked into the dungeon, his usual smile was gone, replaced by an extremely solemn look. As for Jan, he looked like a corpse without a soul, with a dull face and absent eyes. Only the few remaining blood colors on his face showed that he was still alive. Seeing the two people coming in, Lawrence sighed, knowing that what he guessed had happened. Lord Bonaparte, the girl has been found, but, old Scene pursed his lips, looked at Jan next to him with sympathy, and then said, she is dead. Lawrence nodded to indicate that he knew, and basically confirmed that this was Zero's handiwork. Whether it was coercion or inducement, Zero used the girl to invite Jan to the tavern to get drunk, took the opportunity to steal the key, and finally killed him to silence him. Do you know how she died? Lawrence asked, wanting to see how vicious Zero's methods were. Alas, old Scene sighed. He often heard Jan mention that girl. He thought that the two of them would get married and live in love for the rest of their lives. Unexpectedly, such an accident happened suddenly. So he said seriously, we asked her parents, and they said that she suddenly had unbearable abdominal pain in the afternoon. A man who claimed to be a doctor came forward to offer help and said that she needed to undergo surgery immediately, but the operation failed. Unbearable abdominal pain, need surgery? Lawrence thought about it and knew that the poor girl was probably poisoned. In order not to expose that the girl was poisoned, Zhao specially arranged a killer disguised as a doctor to create a reasonable medical accident. What a perfect and smooth conspiracy. Lawrence bit his lip and felt that Zhao was a little tricky. If he didn't know about the existence of such a conspirator, Lawrence would not even connect the one-eyed prison escape with the girl's death. As for tracking down the murderous doctor, I'm afraid that I won't be able to find any clues. Lawrence also wisely gave up and dealt with the one-eyed prison escape first. Tears welled up in Jan's eyes, and he choked up and said, "She was smiling at me happily at noon. It's all my fault. I gave her too much wine, which made her stomach." "Don't be silly, kid," Lawrence said bluntly with a blank expression. Compared to comforting others, Lawrence is more accustomed to throwing the truth to them directly. Can drinking those fruit wines mixed with water in the drinking pub put people on the operating table? Jan was stunned, and a few tears slid down his cheeks. He asked in a daze, "What does the Lord mean? She deliberately asked you to drink in the morning, and deliberately got you drunk. Your key happened to be lost, and the key lost happened to be the one in One Eye's cell. One Eye happened to get this key, and the girl happened to have abdominal pain, and died in an operation that no one could blame, and the doctor happened to be missing." Lawrence looked into Jan's eyes and said mercilessly. Then he closed his eyes and added, "It's just like a perfectly fitted gear." "You mean someone is controlling it?" Fortunately, Jan did not lose his mind. He understood what Lawrence meant after a little thought. Lawrence nodded twice, closed his eyes and sighed, and said with a sigh, "Poor girl, she suffered such pain after being poisoned, and the doctor who came was a killer. She lay on the operating table trustingly, and let the other party cut her open, but the killer stuck a sharp knife into her heart." Old Scene couldn't help but wipe away his tears after hearing this, and patted Jan's shoulder sympathetically. "Who is it? Who is it? I killed him." Jan clenched his fist and smashed it on the iron door next to him. A huge clang echoed in the dungeon. His tears had stopped, but his whole body, even the roots of his teeth, trembled uncontrollably because of anger, and his low roar sounded like a hungry wolf baring its teeth. "Ciro Russell, the name of the mastermind behind the scenes," Lawrence said in a deep voice. "You can't kill him alone." Ciro Russell? Jan had heard the seniors in the team mention this name before, but they didn't talk much, and everyone who talked about it looked terrified, as if they were talking about the devil. But Jan didn't care. The girl's smiling face at noon was still in front of him, and they even agreed to meet again next week. However, when Jan saw her again, he only saw a corpse covered with a white cloth. "No matter who it is, I want him dead." Jan's voice was a little hoarse, and I don't know if it was because he cried too much on the road. "You can't kill him." Lawrence shook his head slowly and said softly, "But maybe I can." Jan looked into Lawrence's eyes, took a deep breath, and then slowly exhaled. The meaning of Lawrence's words was already very clear. "As long as I can avenge her, I'm willing to give up everything and follow you. Even if I fall into hell, I'm willing." Jan raised his head. His clear eyes were not confused at all. Only a few tear marks on his face still remembered his cowardly and immature past. Without hesitation, he placed his right hand in front of his heart and recited the oath to Lawrence word by word. "An avenger who terrifies all enemies has been born." Although he is still very fragile at present, Lawrence believes that he has unlimited potential. Lawrence also nodded solemnly, accepted Jan's oath, and said, "I make a covenant with you. If I can execute Zillow with my own hands, I will let you do it. If I can get Zillow's body, I will let you burn it." Jan did not speak, but nodded firmly. Read the correct version on 1619 book bar. "Okay, kid, go to sleep and forget about these things for a while. Zillow Russell is not someone who can be solved by rushing into his house and shooting," Lawrence said, indicating that Jan could leave. Looking at Jan's back as he left, Old Scene sighed. He was indeed a good kid. "I don't know if this path is suitable for him." Lawrence shook his head indifferently and said, "This is the path he chose. I need his loyalty, and he needs my power. We just get what we need." After that, Lawrence remembered that he had not told Old Scene about the expansion of the patrol team, so he briefly told him the decision of the parliament in the afternoon. Old Scene was like those members who didn't know the inside story at first, thinking that this was a great thing for the patrol team. After Lawrence explained it, he found the trap. "Lord Bonaparte, there are indeed many hidden dangers. It is estimated that the infighting between the new and old team members alone will not stop," Old Scene said with a worried face. He has been in the patrol team for more than 10 years. Seeing that Lawrence's arrival has made this place flourish, he doesn't want to go back to the days when he was despised. "I know all this, too." Lawrence nodded in acknowledgement. He had basically summarized these risks in the parliament, and added, "Two things are important now. One is to catch the one-eyed man as soon as possible, and the other is to find a way to recruit new patrolmen in the West City District. Old Scene thought about it, and both of these things were not easy to do. The one-eyed man would definitely lie dormant for a long time after escaping from the dungeon, and it would be difficult to find his location. Even if the one-eyed man was cautious enough, he would stay directly at ZLUO's place. As for recruiting new soldiers in the West City District, in the words of Old Scene, tying 50 dogs in the team would be more useful than the poor people recruited there. Although Lawrence knew that there must be useful talents among these poor people, he had to admit that this was indeed a difficult task. Anyway, we must go to the West City District tomorrow. Just like last time, bring 20 people, fully armed, and go with me. Lawrence instructed Old Scene, and then couldn't help yawning. It was indeed very late. Thanks to the book friend for his recommendation, votes and rewards. Thanks for your support ORZ. Chapter 25 Arrangement. Although it was late at night, there was never a lack of sleepless people in Ajaccio. West City District, the headquarters of the Dock Workers Union. His one eye suddenly woke up from the bed and sat up alertly. The habit of struggling on the brink of death every day made one eye alert at the slightest movement. There were footsteps outside the room, and then someone gently pushed open the door. With the moonlight projected in from the window, one eye recognized that the person who pushed the door in was Ciro Russell, who even he had to retreat 3 steps away. Ciro smiled and lit the candlestick, and asked with concern, "How was your rest?" One eye twisted his neck, and there were bursts of snapping sounds between his muscles and bones. He said, "If no one disturbed me, I might sleep better." Ciro lowered his head and smiled, and joked, "It's much more comfortable than staying in the dungeon." One eye didn't say anything, but glanced at Ciro in the dim candlelight. This guy's thoughts were as unpredictable as usual. "That's true. I owe you this time." One eye leaned against the back of the bed and sighed. Although he didn't know what the consequences would be if he owed ZLUO a favor, one eye didn't want to stay in that dark and damp cell and get moldy. "In that case, I need you to do me a favor." ZLUO still smiled faintly, as if he had guessed that one eye would say that. "Help? What for?" One eye asked vigilantly. Although he was simple-minded, he was not stupid. The matter that made ZLUO ask for help was definitely not simple. "I'm afraid Napoleon Bonaparte will be furious when he knows that you and your people escaped from the dungeon so brazenly." ZLUO suddenly turned the topic to Lawrence. "HMPH, you did this on purpose." The one-eyed man looked at Zero with 3 parts dissatisfaction and 7 parts fear, and said, "With your ability, it would be easy for you to get me out secretly. You deliberately let me out in broad daylight, just to embarrass that Bonaparte." "Oh," Zero said with a little surprise, "I have changed my opinion of you. After being in jail for a few days, you have become smarter." The one-eyed man grinned in dissatisfaction. He couldn't bear Zero's beating around the bush here, so he said directly, "What exactly do you want to help with?" Zero became a little more serious and analyzed. "Lawrence has been slapped in the face, and he will definitely come to Zachin District tomorrow to inquire about your whereabouts. So what? He dares to find out and come to the Union headquarters." The one-eyed man waved his hand nonchalantly. "No, no, no." Zero stretched out his index finger, waved it repeatedly in front of the one-eyed man's nose, and said, "I will not harbor you. On the contrary, I want you to take the initiative to lead people to kill Lawrence. Of course, I can't be involved in any of my hair." After hearing this, the one-eyed man couldn't help but screamed, "You want me to kill a confidant of Paulie in the street?" Zero clicked his nails indifferently and said, "A fugitive escaped from prison and led people to attack the officer who came to investigate in order to avoid being chased. How logical it is. I'm sure that this is happening in a corner of the world now." Seeing that the one-eyed man was still hesitant, Zero stopped talking nonsense and threatened directly, "If you don't agree, then it's a waste of time to save you. I might as well send you back to the dungeon before dawn." The one-eyed man shuddered. If someone else said this, the one-eyed man would take it as a joke. But when these words came from Zero's mouth, the one-eyed man believed that he would definitely do what he said. "If I refuse, I'm afraid that when I open my eyes again, I will see the same darkness in the damn dungeon again." "I understand. I'll gather my men tomorrow morning." One Eye closed his eyes and said helplessly against the back of the bed, Very good. Zluo nodded with satisfaction, and when he left the room, he did not forget to ask, remember, don't involve me in any way. I understand. Why be so mysterious? Lawrence can guess it. One Eye muttered impatiently. Stupid. Zluo shook his head and said, even if he knows that I ordered it, what does it matter? What I want is not to leave any handle on the surface. Understand? The next morning, since it was already past 2 o'clock in the morning when he returned home last night, Lawrence couldn't help but stay asleep in bed for a while. When he got up and dressed, Anna had already gone out and returned. She was wearing a light yellow headscarf today. When she entered the house, she had a large basket on her arm, which was filled with fresh fruits and vegetables. There was even morning dew on them, which seemed to be freshly picked. After carrying the basket into the kitchen, Anna looked a little worried and said to Lawrence, Sir, did something happen in the patrol team? I heard people outside discussing it. Lawrence buttoned his sleeves with great effort and asked casually, really? What are they talking about? Lawrence expected that the one-eyed man's escape from prison would cause such a commotion. After all, a murderer with blood on his hands escaped from prison. Such a topic would always cause panic among the neighbors. Anna pushed her chin with her hand and recalled. Everyone in the market said that they would close their stalls early tonight. They all said that the one-eyed man and his men had escaped from prison. Lawrence hung the dagger and pistol on his waist. Although he really had no talent in fighting, he would always feel more at ease with weapons. Did they say anything else? Lawrence straightened his clothes and continued to ask Anna. A perfect version in the 16:9 book forum. Yeah, that's right. Anna suddenly remembered and said with a smile, although everyone is a little scared, everyone believes that you can bring the one-eyed man to justice soon. Lawrence smiled bitterly and shook his head. He didn't know whether he should be happy about people's views. After all, he had no idea about catching the one-eyed man. In the patrol station, Old Scene had distributed the muskets, bullets and gunpowder, and 20 armed guards lined up in 2 teams. With their straight uniforms and shiny gun barrels on their backs, they were at least as imposing as the Corsican National Defense Force. However, Lawrence also knew that in terms of combat effectiveness, these patrol soldiers were not a little bit worse than the regular army that had experienced hundreds of battles. At Lawrence's special request, the young man who was reborn last night and had unlimited potential, Jan, was also specially summoned to follow Lawrence. Lawrence specifically glanced at Jan, who was standing behind him. The trace of cowardice that still remained in him last night had completely disappeared without a trace. Now his eyes were as clear as ice, without a trace of confusion. Jan, you can still give up following me now. The price you have to pay to achieve your goal may be beyond your imagination. Lawrence put his hand on Jan's shoulder and said softly. Jan's eyes looked straight ahead, even though there was nothing there. His lips trembled slightly, and the sound he made was very light, but very firm. My oath has been made. I have nothing to ask for, except atonement and revenge for the rest of my life. For this, I'm willing to give everything I have. Lawrence closed his eyes, put his hand down from his shoulder, nodded heavily twice, then turned around and ordered. Everyone listen to my order. March to Zichin district. Thank you Fashion Bay Ruameng book friend for the recommendation ticket, monthly ticket and reward support. Thank you very much. Thank you occasional Jianghu book friend for the recommendation ticket and continued support. Thanks to the recommendation vote of Kinwang Zhao Zeng book friend. Thank you. Please support the new book during the period of publication. This book will definitely not leave regrets and live up to everyone's expectations. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.